This all started about a month ago. I had just gotten home from a long day on a job site, sweaty and beat, ready to crash with something to eat and some TV. The mailbox was stuffed with the usual: bills, flyers, a coupon for a pizza place, so I grabbed it all and dumped it on the kitchen counter. But tucked in with the junk was something weird. A small tarnished key with a plain oval head and a single jagged tooth. It was wrapped in a scrap of brown paper. No writing, no address, just blank. I figured that it was a mistake, or maybe some kids pranking me or something. Now, my house is pretty old, built in the 60s with standard locks on the doors and windows, so I tested the key on everything: front door, back door, garage padlock, even the rusty gate to the backyard. But nothing fit. I figured that maybe someone was returning a key from someone in the past or something. In any case, I tossed it in a junk drawer with some old batteries, and I genuinely forgot about it. That night, at around midnight, I was half asleep on the couch when I heard something. A faint click, like metal tapping metal, coming from the side door off the kitchen. It's the one that I use most, leading to a narrow alley between my house and the empty lot next door. I sat up, listening, but the sound didn't repeat. My dog, Koopy, a stocky lab mix, was curled up by the coffee table, ears perked but not alarmed. I figured that it was just the house creaking. I mean, old houses do that, right? And so I went back to bed, checking the locks as usual. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same click, but sharper this time, like somebody was turning a key in the lock. Koopy growled low, staring at the door, his tail stiff. I checked it, bat in hand, but the alley was empty, the door locked tight, and no scratches or marks. The motion light hadn't even tripped too, which was weird, but it kept happening every night, always between midnight and 1 a.m. Just one or two clicks, deliberate, like somebody was testing the lock but not forcing it. Koopy started getting antsy too, refusing to go near the side door after dark and even for his nightly pee. I'd take him out the front instead, but he'd always keep looking toward that alley, heckles up, and I checked the lock during the daylight, took it apart with my tools in fact, but there was nothing wrong. No wear, no signs of anyone messing with it. I even asked my neighbor, an older woman who's lived here forever, if she'd heard anything weird. She said no, just the usual stray cats, but suggested that I get a camera to be safe. So I ordered a cheap one online, the kind that records to a card, and I set it up facing the side door. The first few nights, the camera showed nothing, just the alley, the trash cans, and the occasional leaf blowing by. But on the fifth night, it caught something. A faint shadow, tall and narrow, moving just out of frame at the edge of the alley. Whoever it was, they didn't step into the light and they didn't make a sound, just sort of paused for a second and then they left. But that clicking sound, it happened right after it, clear on the audio. I checked the alley the next morning, expecting nothing, but there was a mark within the dirt, a clear sort of brush or smudge, like someone had dragged a shoe there. Too vague to be a full print, but fresh enough to notice and large enough too. I was spooked by that for sure. I started keeping the blinds closed, checking the locks twice before bed. The key was still in my drawer and I couldn't stop thinking about it too. So I pulled it out one evening and really had a good look at it. And I mean, it was worn, but really that was all there was to it. I started carrying it though in my pocket. I'm not sure why, but it was like a piece to the puzzle that I needed to solve. The clicking got more frequent though, sometimes 3 or even 4 times a night, always at the side door. Koopy, he would no longer even go near the kitchen anymore, sticking to the living room like it was a safe zone. Now, I called a buddy who's a cop and asked him to swing by on his patrol one night. He checked the alley and found nothing, and said that it was probably just kids messing around with me, but I could tell that he didn't buy it either. I mean, the alley is too narrow, too out of the way for random pranks, so I decided to dig a little bit deeper. Now, my house is a small basement, mostly used for storage, so I went down there to see if anything was off. It's a bit of a damp concrete space with boxes of junk from previous owners, old tools, broken lamps, some moldy books, and quite honestly, I went down there to see if this key fit anything here. In the corner as well, under a tarp, I found like a metal box set on the floor. It seemed to be bolted into the floor as well, and it had a padlock shut on it. And when I saw it, my heart instantly sank. I'd never really noticed it before. Well, I tried the key from the mailbox and it slid into that lock perfectly, like it was made for it, turning with a soft click. Inside was a small space, barely a foot deep, with a single item, a folded piece of cloth, stained and stiff, wrapped around a small cracked photo frame. The photo showed a man that I didn't recognize, middle-aged, wiry with a blank stare, standing in my alley. In fact, pretty much right where the camera caught that shadow that night. The back had my address scribbled in pencil, dated 15 years ago. Well, seeing that, I put it back in and I just locked it away again, too freaked to tell anyone. But the clicking, it didn't stop. Every night, same time, same door. I started sleeping in my living room, bat by my side, Koopy pressed against me, and last week, the camera caught something else. 12:30 at night, that shadow was back, but it seemed to be closer this time, standing just outside the door's light. Whoever it was, they didn't move and they just stood there, just outside of where I could make out any details, and they must have stood there for nearly 2 minutes, then stepped back into the dark and seemingly just left. The audio picked up the click again, but this time also like scuffling sounds, as well as almost like somebody muttering under their breath. Well, the next morning I found another key, identical to the first, same sort of tarnish and look to it, lying on the doorstep, right where the shadow was standing. I didn't touch it and just swept it away into a baggie and locked it in my toolbox with the first one that I still have. I've stopped using the side door now. I keep the lights on at night as well, and I'm saving up to move somewhere without alleys or empty lots like this. I cannot shake the feeling that whoever's out there, that they know this house and that those clicks are them trying to get in here. About a decade ago, when I was barely out of high school, my dad and I ended up crashing at a co-worker's place in a small industrial town while he sorted out some family stuff. It was a temporary setup, a cramped duplex on the edge of a noisy rail yard, with trains rattling by day and night. The place was nothing special. Peeling paint, mismatched furniture, the kind of spot that you would expect someone scraping by from. At first, everything seemed okay though, just a bit dreary with the constant hum of the yard outside. But after a couple of weeks, things started getting weird, especially in the spare room where I'd set up my air mattress. It's hard to explain, but the vibe in there just sort of shifted, and what started as vague unease turned into something that I still cannot shake. The trouble began with these reoccurring dreams, more like night terrors really, but hit me almost every night. In them, a blurry, faceless shape would appear, not quite human, more like a smudge of grey mist roughly shaped like a person. It'd hover at the edge of the room, near the closet door, and mutter a single question over and over in this low, scratchy voice. Where is Caleb? No face, no eyes, just this vague outline that seemed to soak up the light, standing there, motionless but heavy, like it was pinning me to the bed with its presence almost. It never moved closer, mind you, never did anything but repeat that name, Caleb, in a way that made my skin crawl. I would wake up sweating, heart racing, and the room would feel wrong. Too cold, too still, like the air was holding its breath. After a few nights of this, I started dreading that room. I'd lie awake staring at the closet, half expecting something to step out. Sleep became impossible, so I dragged my blankets to the living room couch and bunked there instead, claiming that the train noise was keeping me up. One afternoon, my dad and his co-worker, Tina, they noticed that I looked pretty rough and asked why I wasn't using the spare room anymore. I hesitated, feeling a little bit dumb, but finally spilled out about the dreams, the misty figure, the way that it kept asking for Caleb, how it made the room feel like a trap. I expected them to laugh it off, maybe say that I was stressed or watching too many horror flicks. But when I mentioned the name Caleb, Tina went still, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her mouth. Her face drained of color, and she asked, sharply, "Caleb?" It was asking for Caleb. I nodded, thrown by her reaction. And then she told us something that genuinely made my stomach drop. So years back, a guy named Caleb had rented the same room for her for a few months. He was a loner type, kept odd hours, and had this habit that creeped her out. He'd sit in the tiny attached bathroom, let the shower run full blast, and mutter to himself for hours apparently, like he was arguing with someone who wasn't there. She'd overhear him through the thin walls, his voice low and intense, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry. It got so unsettling that she finally asked him to leave, and he vanished without a word, leaving behind a few clothes and a weird rusted pocket knife that she found under the bathroom sink. That wasn't the worst of it though, because the night after I told Tina about the dreams, I went back to the spare room to grab my charger, figuring that I would be in and out quickly. But as I reached for the outlet near the closet, I noticed something on the wall, a faint, smudged sort of outline, like somebody had pressed a dirty hand against the paint, but too small, almost child-sized in fact, but with elongated fingers that didn't look quite right. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of that. I'd spent enough time staring at those walls to know every crack, in fact. When I touched it, the plaster felt cold, colder than the rest of the room, and the smudge flaked away under my fingers, leaving what looked like a faint burn mark. I called Tina in, and she stared at it, muttering something about needing to repaint. But the next day, the mark was gone, like it had never even been there. But the chill in that room lingered, and I swore that I could smell some sort of acidic tang. My dad, who's not big on spooky stuff, he got rattled enough to do something about it, in fact. He burnt some sage that he got from a co-worker and sprinkled salt around the room's corners, muttering some half-remembered words from his grandma's old prayers. It felt silly at the time, but, I wasn't arguing. In fact, I never slept in that room again, sticking to the couch until we moved out about a month later. Tina didn't talk about it much after that too, but she did start locking the spare room's door when she wasn't home, and I could tell that she didn't trust it either. I asked around town later, and a guy at the hardware store mentioned the duplex had been built on land that used to be a rail workers' camp, where accidents were pretty common apparently. Men crushed by trains, fights breaking out in the barracks, some never accounted for. He didn't know about any Caleb, but he said folks used to avoid that lot, claiming that they felt watched. And well, that was 10 years ago now. We're long gone from that town now, living in a new place with no weird vibes whatsoever. I've tried looking up the name Caleb, even checked old tenant records through a friend who worked at City Hall, but I never found anything solid. Only a passing mention of a drifter. The dreams, though, they stopped once we left, but that handprint, the way that it burned and vanished like that, it still sticks with me for sure. That, I know, was not just a nightmare, and it wasn't something that I just felt or sensed or whatever. It was tangible. I saw it with my own eyes, and I don't know if it was a ghost, some leftover energy from the land, or something else entirely, but whatever it was real enough to touch that wall. About 15 years ago, when I was just a scrawny kid of 13, living in a sleepy factory town on the edge of a sprawling marsh, something latched onto me. Something dark, something that felt like it crawled out of a nightmare and decided to make my life its playground. Our house was a modest split level, built in the 70s, nothing fancy, with creaky floors and a backyard that backed up to a muddy creek, where cattails grew thick and the air always smelled faintly of damp rot. I had always been a bit sensitive to things, picking up on moods in a room, feeling uneasy in certain places for no reason. But this was different. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a vibe. It was heavy, deliberate, and it scared me in a way that I just couldn't shake. It all started one muggy summer morning when I was sleeping in my cramped bedroom, a small space cluttered with comic books, a second-hand desk, and a lumpy twin bed shoved against a window that overlooked the creek. I jolted awake at around 5 in the morning, heart pounding, drenched in sweat, despite the fan whirring on my nightstand. The room, it was dim, the first grey light of dawn barely creeping through the blinds, but the air felt wrong, thick, like it was pressing down on me. A wave of dread suddenly hit me, raw and instinctive, like the kind that you'd feel if you were being stalked in the dark. I couldn't move, couldn't even turn my head to scan the room, as if something was holding me in place. My eyes locked on the ceiling where shadows seemed to twist just out of focus. Then, out of nowhere, a sound ripped through the silence. A guttural, ear-splitting wail. Not human and not animal, but like metal grinding. It wasn't just loud too. It felt like it came from inside of my skull, vibrating literally through my teeth. I froze, every muscle locked in terror, until exhaustion somehow pulled me back under, and I must have passed out. At that moment, it stuck with me, but things went quiet for a while after that. No weird dreams, no strange noises, just the normal hum of life, really. I ended up chalking it up to a bad night. Maybe a nightmare amped up by too many horror movies or something. But a couple of years later, when I was 16, it came back, and this time it wasn't just a one-off. It started on a fall evening when my parents asked me to take the kitchen trash out to the metal bin by the garage. I've always hated the dark, still do in fact, and that night, the idea of stepping outside felt like walking into a trap. My gut was literally screaming at me to stay inside, like some primal alarm bell going off. But I didn't want to look like a coward or insane, so I grabbed the bag, sprinted across the backyard, and literally chucked it into the bin, the lid clanging shut louder than it should have in the still air. As I turned to head back, my eyes caught the old pickup truck parked in our driveway, its chipped blue paint glinting faintly under the streetlight. But something made me stop, a pull, like a magnet, urging me to look at the driver's side window. And there, slouched in the seat, was what I can only describe as a figure. It wasn't my dad or anyone that I knew, I can assure you of that as well. Whoever it was, they were tall. Unnaturally so, in fact. The limbs of this person way too long for the cab. Its skin sort of looked sickly from where I was. Almost translucent grey, like wet ash. The face, what I could make of it, and if you could even call it that, was a blur. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth expanse that seemed to shift when I tried to focus on it. It didn't move, mind you, just sort of sat there. All of a sudden, too, I realized that something was wrong. My chest began to ache with terror so deep that it felt like my bones were trembling. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't budge. I was literally frozen on the spot, forced to stare at this thing. It radiated malice, though. Not anger or hate, but something colder, like it was evil distilled in a single form. Then, like a string snapping, I just broke free, stumbling backwards so quickly that I nearly tripped over the curb. I bolted inside, slamming the door and locking it behind me, my heart hammering as I leaned against the wall, gasping for air. And when I peeked out the window a minute later, the truck was empty, the driveway still. But I knew what I had seen, and the memory of that faceless thing burned into me, sharp and unshakable. From then on, too, the house, it was never the same. It started small, but it was always aimed at me. I would wake up in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, my ears ringing with a sound that was like a firecracker going off inches from my head, sharp, explosive, gone in a flash. It happened sporadically at first, maybe once a month, but by the time that I was 18, it was almost nightly. And then the voices started. Usually, it was a woman's voice, soft but clear, whispering my name, Evan, right as I was drifting off or jerking me awake. It wasn't soothing or friendly, mind you. It had an edge to it, almost like she was testing me, seeing if I would answer. I would lie there, eyes wide, scanning the dark, but the room was always empty. One night, though, it wasn't the woman. It was a man's voice, deep and gravelly, saying my name with a weight that made the air feel like it was closing in on me. That's when things got worse. The sense of being watched, well, that never left, especially at night or in the early morning when the house was quiet. It wasn't just a feeling, though. It was constant, like something was standing just out of sight, breathing down my neck. The activity ramped up in ways that I couldn't ignore anymore, too. Objects started moving, small things at first, like a pen rolling off of my desk when I walked by, or a book sliding from a shelf for no reason. And then it got bolder, it seemed. A glass that I'd left on the kitchen counter shattered on the floor one night, untouched, while I was alone in the house. Doors would creak open an inch or two, then slam shut when I got close. The worst were the noises, though, scraping sounds from the attic, like claws dragging across wood, or faint knocks from inside the walls, always stopping when I tried to pinpoint them. My parents, they barely noticed, but my dad mentioned at one time hearing a thump once or twice. He brushed it off as the house settling or rats crawling in the crawl space. My mum just thought that I was stressed from school, but I knew that it was targeting me, like it had picked me out from that first scream years ago. The breaking point, though, that came when I was 19. So during a winter when the marsh froze over one year, and the air was so cold that it hurt to breathe, I had started keeping a cheap security camera in the backyard, but one of those motion-activated ones, because I was so paranoid about what was happening outside at night. One morning, after another sleepless night of hearing my name whispered, this time in both voices, mind you, the woman's and the man's, layered together almost. I checked the footage, and at 2:47 a.m., a dark, shapeless mass moved across the frame. Now, it wasn't smoke or fog, it was dense, almost liquid, swirling like ink and water, and drifted straight from the creek's edge to our back door, where it seemed to, seep through the cracks and vanish. The footage cut out for a split second, then resumed with nothing there. I must have played that thing back a dozen times too, my hand shaking as I did. The thing, it wasn't just outside. It had gotten in, or at least wanted me to know that it could. That same night, I found something else too. So on the wall beside my bedroom door, scratched into the paint it seemed, was a jagged symbol, 3 uneven lines crossing in a star-like shape, rough and deep, like someone had clawed it in with a knife or something. It hadn't been there before, and nobody else in the house would have done this. I showed my dad, but he couldn't understand how it happened. He just sort of frowned and speculated that maybe someone broke in at one point and that they did that. Except nothing was ever stolen and the doors were always locked, so I don't know, that didn't make much sense. But it was around this point that genuinely I was at my wit's end. The voices, the noises, the falling objects, they were wearing me down and making me jumpy and truly paranoid too. Now, I'm not a religious person by any means, but one night after waking to that man's voice saying my name again so close that it felt like he was leaning over me, I just couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed an old Bible from my mum's bookshelf, flipped to a random psalm and whispered it under my breath, begging for whatever was in this house to leave me alone. And look, I don't know if it was the words or just desperation, but I genuinely felt a shift, like the air just suddenly lightened a bit. The activity didn't stop entirely, but I definitely noticed that it slowed. Fewer noises, no more voices for a while. I started carrying a small cross that my grandma gave me, not because I was devout or anything, but because it just felt like a shield for me. And, strangely enough, things quieted down after that, at least enough for me to function. We eventually moved out of that house a year later, to a new place closer to the city, all clean lines and no history. And the dream stopped, the noises vanished, and I haven't seen that symbol or felt that crushing dread ever since then. But sometimes, especially on still nights when the air feels too heavy, I get this sort of faint prickle, like something is still out there waiting for me. And look, that might just be paranoia, I know that. In any case, I don't know if it was a demon, a ghost, or something the marsh itself coughed up, but it was real, and I am terrified that it's going to find me again, and that I'm going to have to go through all of this again. I'm not the kind of person who usually buys into weird, spooky stuff. I mean, I've always thought ghost stories were just something people had made up to scare each other, nothing more. But something happened a couple of weeks ago that's got me rattled, and I cannot stop turning it over in my head. So I'm a single mum to 2 4-year-old girls, Mia and Zoe, and we live in a small rundown apartment building in a gritty coastal town, where the air always smells faintly of fish and salt. It's not fancy by any means, just a concrete box really with thin walls and flickering hallway lights, but it's home to us. Now, there's this old guy, Mr. Hargrove, who lives in the unit below us. He's got to be pushing 90 now, walks with a cane, and mostly keeps to himself. He'll nod if we pass him on the stairs, maybe mumble a quick hello, but really that's about it. My girls have never really paid him any attention. No questions, no pointing, nothing. He's just the grumpy old man downstairs and part of the scenery. Now, it was a rainy Wednesday morning, and I was in our cramped kitchen trying to throw together some mac and cheese for dinner. The girls were in the living room playing with their blocks, the usual kid chaos of giggles and clattering everywhere. And out of nowhere, they both come tearing into the kitchen, faces red, tears streaming, shaking like they'd seen a monster. I dropped the spoon that I was holding, thinking that one of them had gotten hurt or that they'd broken something. But they were sobbing so hard that they could barely talk, clinging to me like I was a lifeline. I knelt down, asking what was wrong, if they'd fallen or fought. It took a good 5 minutes, too, to calm them down enough to get the words out, and when I did, what they said genuinely made my skin crawl. They kept repeating, "The quiet man said Uncle Nate's in trouble." Their voices were shaky but dead serious, like they had seen something. I was confused. I mean, we were alone in that apartment. Doors locked, windows bolted. No way anyone could have gotten in without me hearing. Our place is tiny, too. You can hear the neighbor's TV through the walls, in fact, let alone footsteps. So I asked, "What quiet man? Where was he?" And they both pointed toward the living room, toward the small window that faces the alley and Mr. Hargrove's balcony below. "He was there," Mia said, "standing by the window looking at us." Zoe nodded, wiping her nose, saying he was all still and didn't talk loud. Well, I bolted to the living room, half expecting to find someone staring in, but it was empty. The window was locked. I checked it and double-checked it. The cheap blinds undisturbed. No marks or fog on the glass or anything. I checked every inch of that apartment. Bedrooms, bathroom, under the couch, even the tiny coat closet. But there was nothing. No one was there. No signs of break-in. Just the hum of the fridge and the patter of rain outside now. But the part that really got me was the Uncle Nate thing. You see, Nate's my younger brother, but he's been out of my life for years. We had a bad fight back when I was pregnant with the girls, over money and some choices that he was making, and we really haven't spoken since. He lives halfway across the country in a different state, and I've never mentioned him to Mia or Zoe. They don't know that he even exists, in fact. No stories, no photos, nothing. I pressed them a bit, trying to keep my voice steady, asking what the man looked like. Zoe said that he was tall and skinny, with a big coat and no hair. Mia chimed in saying that he had a line on his face like a cut, and touched her own jaw, tracing a curve from her ear to her chin. My stomach instantly dropped. You see, Nate's got a distinctive scar on his jawline from a skateboarding accident when he was a teenager, a deep gash that needed stitches and left a jagged mark. There's no way that my girls could have known that. I've kept every trace of him out of their lives, in fact. No old family albums, no mentions during calls with my parents, nothing. I tried to play it off, asking if they had seen him on TV or heard me talking, but they shook their heads, insistent that the quiet man told them that Uncle Nate was in trouble and needed to see them soon. They said that he didn't speak out loud, but made the words in their heads. His voice was soft but heavy, like a whisper that carried weight. I was freaking out, but I didn't want to scare them any more than they already were, so I distracted them with dinner and some cartoons, keeping one eye on the living room window. The rain, it kept falling, a steady drum against the roof, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off now. I checked the window again before bed. I looked for anything, a shadow, a reflection, a smudge, but it was just the same grimy glass reflection, the dim glow of our table lamp. Still, I will not lie and say that I didn't feel watched, like something was lingering just beyond my sight. I tucked the girls in, double-checked the locks, and barely slept, my mind racing. Were they just making it up? Kids do have wild imaginations, but the details were way too specific and way too tied to Nate, someone they shouldn't even know exists. And the way that they were both so shaken, describing the exact same thing without hesitating, it wasn't like their usual silly stories about monsters under the bed and things of this nature. Well, the next morning I noticed something that made my heart skip. On the living room floor, right by the window where the girl said the man stood, was a small, crumpled leaf, wet and completely out of place, like it had been tracked in from outside. Our apartment's on the 3rd floor, mind you, no trees close enough to drop leaves through a window, and we hadn't been outside since before the rain started. The leaf, it was dark, almost black with a faint oily sheen that left a greasy smudge when I picked it up. I tossed it in the trash, but when I checked later, it was now gone. Not in the bin, not on the floor, it was nowhere. The girls didn't know anything about it, but Zoe got quiet when I asked, saying, "Did the quiet man drop something?" In the end, I tried to laugh it off, but my hands were genuinely shaking when I picked up that leaf. Anyway, for the next few days, I kept a close eye on everything. The girls went back to their normal selves, playing and bickering like always, but they'd get weirdly quiet if I brought up that man. I started noticing little things around the apartment too, stuff that just wasn't quite right. Like a toy car left on the coffee table would be moved to the kitchen counter when I wasn't looking. The TV remote ended up under a couch cushion that I hadn't touched. Once I found one of Mia's crayons snapped in half, lying on the living room floor near that window, the broken ends smudged with that same oily residue that seemed to be on that leaf. I started keeping the blinds shut tight, avoiding the living room after dark, but the feeling of being watched, it didn't go away. At night, I would just lie awake, listening for anything strange. Footsteps, whispers, anything. But it was just the usual creaks of the building and the distant rumble of trains from the factory district nearby. Then, though, a week later, I got a call that turned everything upside down. It was my aunt, someone that I hadn't talked to in like 6 years, sounding shaken. She said that Nate had apparently been in a bit of a bad spot, gotten into a motorcycle wreck 6 days earlier, which, upon reflection, was the same night that the girls saw that quiet man. He was apparently in the hospital, banged up but alive, with a broken leg and a concussion. She said that he had been apparently asking for me, saying that he needed to make things right and meet his nieces before it was too late. My aunt mentioned that he'd been wearing his old brown coat, the one that he always wore, and that the crash had reopened that scar on his jaw, leaving it raw and bloody. The timing genuinely hit me like a punch. The girl's story, the leaf, the wreck, all lining up. I didn't tell my aunt about what the girls saw, I couldn't get the words out, but I genuinely felt sick, like something had reached into our lives and left a mark. Well, the next day I found something else too. Tucked into the seam of the living room couch, where the girls had been playing that night, was a small tarnished coin, old and worn with markings that I didn't recognize. It definitely wasn't ours too, and we don't even keep loose change lying around here, and the girls don't play with coins. I showed it to Zoe though, and she immediately started crying, saying that it came from the quiet man. I didn't know what to do, so I wrapped it in cloth and I just buried it in the bottom of a drawer, too spooked to throw it out at this stage. I started burning a candle near the window every night, some old habit that my mum used to do for protection, though I felt silly doing it. I spoke to the landlord at some stage, a bit of a gruff guy who doesn't really like questions, but as far as he's concerned, the complex has no history and it's just normal. I even asked Mr. Hargrove if he'd ever noticed anything weird, but He just grunted and said the building's got its moods. Things have thankfully been quiet since then. No more sightings or weird objects, and the girls haven't mentioned the quiet man again. But they still avoid the living room window, and I've caught them whispering to each other about the man who watches. Honestly, I'm now saving up to move. Somewhere new and somewhere without all of this. I haven't reached out to Nate too. I'm not ready to face him or what this all means. But that coin, the leaf, the girl's story, it's not just a coincidence. Something was in that apartment. Something that knew about Nate, left traces that I could touch, and seemingly even spoke to my kids in a way that I cannot explain. Was it a warning? A ghost tied to this place? Something else entirely? Genuinely, I have no idea, but I do keep the lights on now, and every time it rains, I hold my breath, waiting for that quiet man to show up again. This is my first time sharing anything like this online, mostly because I'm really not sure where else to turn. My wife Sarah and I bought a sprawling piece of land a few months ago, a 50-acre chunk of overgrown forest on the outskirts of a quiet rural town, hoping to build a weekend cabin and maybe a few trails for hiking. The realtor pitched it as a steal, remote, untouched, perfect for getting away from the city grind. The guy who sold it to us, an older guy named Harold, mentioned his cousin had been staying out there for a while, living off-grid. We didn't think much of it at the time, figured that it was just some eccentric relative squatting in a tent. But when we finally trekked out to the far edge of the property last month, what we found wasn't a campsite. It was something honestly out of a horror movie, and it's been eating at me ever since then. The hike to the back of the lot took nearly an hour, winding through dense pines and tangled underbrush, the kind of place where the sunlight barely breaks through, and we were just exploring, getting a feel for the land, when Sarah spotted something glinting in the distance. As we got closer, my stomach started to churn. The clearing that we stumbled into was small, maybe 20 feet across, but it was packed with stuff that didn't belong in any forest. There were glass bottles, hundreds of them, strung up on branches with twine, catching the light like eerie chandeliers. Some were empty, others filled with dark fluid that looked too thick to be water, swaying gently in the breeze. Scattered across the ground were rusted metal tools, screwdrivers, pliers, a hammer, arranged in neat circles, like somebody had laid them like that. Worst of all, though, propped up against a gnarled oak tree, was an old wooden chair weathered and splintered, with a pile of broken clocks heaped in the seat, their hands frozen at different times, some cracked, some still ticking faintly. It didn't stop there, though. Tucked into the roots and the bushes were dozens of small hand-carved wooden figures, each about the size of a fist, vaguely human-shaped but wrong. The limbs were too long, heads misshapen, no faces, just smooth whittled surfaces. Some were stabbed into the dirt like stakes too, others were hanging low from branches, swaying next to the bottles. In the center of the clearing was a shallow pit, lined with flat stones, and inside of it sat a cracked ceramic urn, its lid off, filled with what looked like ash and bits of charred bone. That was when I began to get a little bit uneasy. Sarah grabbed my arm suddenly, her face pale, and whispered, "This isn't a camp. This is something else." We didn't stick around long that first day, just took a few shaky photos with my phone and hightailed it back to the car. Back at home, I called Harold to ask what the heck his cousin had been doing out here. He got cagey, said that his cousin Dale was a bit off and liked to mess around with art projects in the woods. He swore, though, that Dale had moved out months ago, but his voice was sort of clipped, like he didn't want to talk about it almost. When I pressed him about the bottles and the urn, he mumbled something about Dale being a collector, and then he just hung up on me. It didn't sit right. Nobody collects like that, not in a way that feels so deliberate and so ritualistic. Well, over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about that clearing. Sarah wanted to hire someone to clear it out, but I wasn't ready to let strangers mess with it, at least not yet. I started going back there alone during the day with a cheap action camera strapped to my chest to record everything. Honestly, I really don't know why too. I guess I thought that documenting it would make it less real, or maybe I just needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind seeing all this stuff. Each trip, though, I began to notice new details. The bottles, they weren't random. Some even had faint etchings, symbols, like spirals, scratched into the glass. The wooden figures seemed to shift position slightly, though I couldn't be sure if it was the wind or something else. One day, though, I found a fresh addition, a small rusted padlock hanging from a low branch near the urn, its clasp locked tight. I know that I hadn't seen that one before, and we also hadn't told anyone about the clearing, so there's no way that someone could have added it without us knowing. But the creepiest find, that came on my third visit. So buried under a pile of leaves near the pit, I found a tattered leather notebook, its pages yellowed and curling now. Inside were pages of cramped, uneven handwriting, dates, times, and what looked like names, dozens of them, none that I recognized. Some entries were just fragments like 312, saw it move again, or the ash knows, don't touch. Others mentioned a keeper who watches from the trees. The last page had a single line, it needs more, always more. The ink here seemed fresh too, not faded, like it had been written recently. I swear too that was when I heard a sort of low hum, like a distant engine coming from the direction of the pit. Well, I didn't stick around to investigate. I hightailed it out of there and I didn't look back. That night though, I showed Sarah the notebook. I took it with me. She didn't want to touch it and said that it gave her a bad feeling just looking at it. We argued about what to do. Call the cops, burn the whole clearing down, or just sell the land and walk away. For whatever reason though, I just couldn't let it go. So I started digging into the property's history, hitting up the town library and scrolling through old records online. Turns out that there were some rumors about somebody practicing odd rituals to appease the woods here, something about offerings to keep bad luck at bay. The records didn't mention bottles or urns or anything, but there was a passing note about a fire in the 1920s that burned part of the forest, leaving behind charred remains that were never identified. Honestly, too, the more I learned, the worse I felt about going back. But I just couldn't stop myself. So I set up a trail cam near the clearing, hidden in a tree, hoping to catch whatever or whoever was messing with that place. The first night's footage was blank too, but the second night, at 2:43 a.m., something moved. It wasn't clear, it was a dark shape, tall and thin, and I don't know if it was a person or not, but it seemed like it was gliding through the clearing without touching the ground. I cannot be sure of that, but whoever it was, they stopped by the urn, seemingly there for a few seconds, and then just vanished. When I checked the clearing the next day, that padlock that I had seen before was now gone, but in its place was a fresh pile of ash in the pit, still warm to the touch, in fact. Well, I bagged a sample, not sure why, but it felt important to me. Well, when I got home, I then noticed tiny flecks of what looked like bone mixed in it. Upon seeing this, though, Sarah had had enough now. She wouldn't come near the property anymore, saying that it felt like something was watching us even when we were home, an hour away. And look, I never heard anything or saw anything that she did, but on one occasion I did find a single glass bottle, and it looked a lot like the ones in the clearing. It was sitting sort of near our doorstep, empty, but it definitely looked like one of those bottles. I ended up smashing it and I swept up the pieces, but the next morning, I swear to you that they were gone. Like the smashed bottle and all the glass remains were just gone. I never told Sarah about that. I mean, she's already on edge and I don't want to push her over. I have thought about confronting Harold again, but something about him just feels really off. He's been driving by the property more often too, his old truck slowing down as he passes the trailhead, almost like he might be checking on something. I'm not sure if he's protecting his cousin or hiding something worse, but whatever the case, I've started carrying a knife when I go out there. Not that I think that it will really do much, but I don't know. The clearing just feels alive and like it's waiting, and every time I step into it, I definitely feel like eyes are on me now from the trees. The notebook that I found, I've locked that in a box underneath my bed, and I've even taped it shut. Whoever is out there, Dale or somebody else, it doesn't seem like whatever they're up to is finished. That ash and those bottles and the ticking clocks, they're not just junk too, I'm sure of it. They're a part of something bigger, something that apparently wants to be fed according to the notebook that I found. Honestly, I'm probably too scared to go back now, but I'm also more scared of what happens if I don't. Has anyone dealt with anything like this? A place that just feels wrong and that leaves things behind that you cannot explain? Honestly, I'm a bit in over my head here, and I could use any advice before all of this escalates into something far greater. At the far end of our quiet suburban street, where the pavement cracks and the weeds push through, sits a crumbling old house that's been abandoned for as long as I've lived here, going on 12 years now. It's a two-story relic, probably from the 1930s, with warped boards nailed over the windows, a sagged porch and a roof missing half of its shingles. The place is a total wreck. No electricity, no water, nothing. The city seems to have cut it off from the grid ages ago after the last owner passed away, and nobody's touched it since. It just sits there, rotting with vines creeping up the sides like it's being swallowed by the earth. My neighbors and I, we mostly ignore it, but there's something about that house that's been eating at me, something that I cannot explain, and I'm wondering if anyone else here has seen anything like this before in other dead-end places. So, from what I've heard around the neighborhood, the house has a bit of a rough past. The old guy who lived there back in the day, Mr. Hensley, was a bit of a recluse, kept to himself after his wife died in some kind of a tragic accident. Nobody's really clear on whether it was a fall down the stairs or something worse. There's also talk about a kid going missing in the area decades ago, maybe tied to the property, though it's all pretty vague stories passed down from older folks. The county records that I checked didn't really help much. Just mentioned the house being seized for unpaid taxes in the 90s, and a couple of vandalism reports since then. The kids used to apparently dare each other to sneak in there, but even they stopped after a while. It's just got this vibe, I guess, like the air around it is much heavier and most people cross the street rather than walk past it. Now, the first weird thing happened a few years back. I was up late, maybe around 2 in the morning, sipping some coffee and staring at my living room window while the rain was hammering down. And that's when I noticed it. A faint, sickly yellow light glowing from one of the upstairs windows of the boarded-up house. Always the same window, second from the left, where the boards are so tight that not even a sliver of glass shows through. It wasn't bright, more like the kind of dull flicker that you'd get from an old incandescent bulb. I figured it was a reflection at first, maybe a car headlight bouncing off of something, but the street was empty, and the light stayed steady, pulsing slightly with the rhythm of the storm. I grabbed my phone, zoomed in, and there it was, clear as day, glowing through the cracks like it was daring me to look. The creepiest part was that the second that the rain let up, at around 4 in the morning, the light just suddenly snapped off, like somebody pulled a plug. Well, I asked my neighbor Carl about it the next day. He's a retired electrician who's lived here forever, and he swore that the house has no power, no wiring, no generator, nothing. But apparently he has seen the light too, every time that it rains hard. And once during a thunderstorm, he said that he caught a glimpse of something else too, a shape standing in front of that window, just a dark outline against the yellow glow. Too tall to be a kid, but too still to be anything normal. His wife backed him up too and said that she saw it as well, though she wouldn't talk about it for long and just sort of crossed herself and changed the subject. I've watched for it since then, and sure enough, every time a storm rolls through, whether it's a drizzle or even a full-on lightning show, that light always comes on. Never on clear nights though, never during snow or fog, only ever in rain. It flicks on when the first drops hit and goes dark the moment that the clouds clear or daytime hits, like it's tied to the water itself almost. What really got me though was last summer during a brutal monsoon here. The street was practically a river, thunder shaking the windows, and that light was burning brighter than ever. I was watching from upstairs, wrapped in a jacket, when I saw it. Not just the glow, but something solid behind it too. I froze upon seeing it, my breath catching. I didn't know what it was, but my dog nearby started growling low too, her hackles up, staring right in that window. Whatever it was unmoving for maybe about 10 seconds. And it was around then that the rain started to taper off, and that was when the light just sort of blinked out. I went and checked the next morning, even climbing a ladder to get a closer look, but there was nothing. No mark, no residue, just weathered wood and rusty nails. But I know what I saw, and my dog's reaction was not imagination too. I've genuinely thought about breaking in to figure out what the heck is going on in there. It nags at me a lot, but I mean, maybe there's a battery-powered lamp that some squatter rigged up or something, or a chemical reaction from old pipes tripping when they get wet. But every time that I get close, standing in front of that house with its blind, boarded eyes, my stomach twists. The air feels wrong, like it's pressing down, and I cannot shake the thought that whatever's lighting that window during storms isn't just wires or tricks or something. It's something awake, something waiting there. Carl says that he once saw a maintenance guy try to pry the boards off that window years ago, and apparently the guy just quit halfway through. Said that he heard humming from inside, like a voice, but not quite. And nobody's tried since then. The house just sits there, silent on dry nights, but when the rain comes, it's like a signal, and I'm not sure that I want to know what's actually answering. It's been going on for 3 years now, as far as I can tell. I've moved my chair so that I can't see the window from my living room anymore, but on stormy nights I still catch myself listening for the patter of rain, knowing that that light will be there. All I will say is that whatever is in there, whether it's wires, pipes, or something else, it has a hold on that place, and I'm not about to walk into this horror story and end up the next thing that people begin to whisper about. So me, male and 28, my wife, female and 28, and my dog, male and 3, recently went to Red River Gorge, a state park in S.E., Kentucky. We're certainly no strangers to camping in the park, have been there at least 20 times over the past 8 years. We chose a spot that I've been to 2 or 3 times before. It's worth noting that this site is outside of other dispersed camping areas, and is essentially the only proper spot with car parking along a 2-mile stretch of road. There is a dilapidated barn, maybe about a mile up from where we drove in, and a cemetery about 1/3 of a mile in the opposite direction. Otherwise, though, it's a rarely traveled road, and we really saw no one all day, just an occasional car, maybe 1 or 2 an hour. The spot is at the base of a 30-foot incline that a 4x4 could handle. Our SUV was parked horizontally at the top, blocking other vehicles from descending. From there, it's about 30 yards into the campground, with another slope leading to the river's edge and the swimming hole. Now, the day went great. We spent time near the beach, letting our dogs swim, then did typical camping activities like hiking, foraging, chopping wood, throwing the hatchet, and enjoying a few beers. Once sunlight began to fade at around 6:30, we started the fire and began cooking dinner. As darkness fell and the last light disappeared, we heard the usual sounds of squirrels rustling, things falling into the leaves, which spooked my wife a bit, but we didn't think too much of it. Then at about 9 p.m., sitting around the healthy fire and listening to music, we heard like heavy shuffling in the leaves. Definitely something large or heavy at least. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the road, I would guess, about halfway between us and our car. I stopped the music and, after about 10 seconds of dead silence, we then heard the shuffling again. Before I could call out, though, we heard this strange and unnatural noise, something like a throttling, ascending pitch mixed with a shriek. Neither of us can verbally describe it, and I can confidently say that I have never heard anything like it before. Whatever it was about 20 to 25 feet away, just outside the reach of my headlamp. Our dog went absolutely insane, too. Hair standing on end, barking incessantly into the darkness. He was on a long lead, or I'm sure that he would have taken off after it. My wife and I were frozen. I was holding my hatchet and trying to catch any movement or sound to track. After about 2 to 3 minutes of that, with no further noises, I calmed the dog and we grabbed some essentials and hurried to the car. Our adrenaline was pumping as we discussed coyotes, foxes, or maybe other animals as the possible culprits. I didn't want to mention the possibility of people, as that would have heightened the paranoia, I guess, but we eventually passed out after about an hour, but I spent the rest of the night in and out of shallow sleep, feeling very uncomfortable both mentally and physically. Now, at around 3 in the morning, right next to my head, I swear that I heard a singular knock on my window, like someone tapped the glass with one knuckle. My wife didn't wake up and I scanned the outside of the car, but I didn't see or hear anything. I struggled to doze off again and my heartbeat was rapid. When we finally got the first light at around 7 a.m., we cooked breakfast, packed up our campsite, and we got the heck out of Dodge. Also, I did check, but there were no prints or anything out of any sorts with our remaining belongings either. What's strange to me, though, is that after hearing the noise, we heard no additional heavy shuffling from the source. With our dog barking so aggressively, we probably should have heard whatever it was moving away. We have looked up various animal noises native to the gorge, and nothing even remotely resembles what we heard. The knock on the window, that was also isolated, and there were no other noises or visible happenings outside the car immediately following that. Lastly, too, I had a thought the day after we left. I remember whistling for our dog after dark, and since we had some scraps to give him near the fire, I called him in. But strangely, immediately I thought I shouldn't have whistled. Up until this trip, I've never been a believer of those sorts of superstitions, but I just like to respect the folklore that I've heard, and I've definitely heard that one. It's weird though that for the first time ever I really thought that, but in hindsight we're now convinced that I may have invited a Wendigo or a skinwalker to our camp. I certainly won't take those superstitions lightly ever again after this, and I'm sure that this occurrence will affect at least my next few overnights in those woods. Back in 2018, I had a part-time job up in Silver Spring. I didn't have a car, so I'd have to use 2 buses to get to downtown Silver Spring. The commute was maybe about an hour each way, and I worked nights, so on weekends I'd get out especially late, around 11:30 p.m. or so. The buses stopped running around midnight, so I'd usually manage to catch the first one, but if I was unlucky, I'd have to walk home from the second station. The second station was Shady Grove Metro, which wasn't too bad since it was up the road from my neighborhood, a 1.5 mile walk. The sidewalk ran alongside a usually busy intersection and highway, but at this hour, it was dead quiet. I was 18 at the time, and I always had my headphones in, completely unafraid of my surroundings. Well, that was until this encounter. So halfway through the walk home, I was about to cross a large intersection when a lone car drove past me, went a little further up the road, and then stopped, opening its passenger side door. I didn't think too much of it at first, assuming that someone was getting dropped off. Montgomery County is generally a safe place, so I didn't feel any immediate concern. But as I kept walking, I noticed something odd. No one was stepping out, and the inside of the car was deathly black, like you couldn't even see any glowing knobs, a radio, Apple Play, nothing. The normal car lights that it usually turn on when you open a door were turned off or just didn't have any. I tried to make sense of the situation. Was this a taxi or an Uber stopping to see if I wanted a ride? But there were no markings, stickers, or anything on the car that indicated that it was a taxi or an Uber. Maybe it was an acquaintance offering a lift. I knew various people around the neighborhood, but I didn't recognize this car, and no one was calling out to me or anything. Finally, I started feeling a bit sketched out, so I stopped walking, quickly glanced behind me to make sure that nobody was sneaking up on me, and then looked back at the car. It dawned on me that I could easily be snatched up and kidnapped here without a single witness at this stage. It was 12:30 at night on a dead silent highway intersection, so my fight or flight instinct suddenly kicked in. I puffed out my chest and tried to look intimidating, hoping that that would deter whoever was in the car. A tense minute passed with no movement from me and no sign of life from the car. Then, finally, the passenger door shut and the car drove off into the night. I walked the rest of the way home with my headphones out, more aware of my surroundings than ever before. I was only 18 then, and I'm 25 now, but I still think about that encounter to this day. Was this a potential kidnapper, a human trafficker, or a murderer or something? Or could it have been something even stranger, like a paranormal encounter or something? I guess I'll probably never know, but that night made me feel extremely uneasy, and it's something that I'll never forget. So there were around 7 of us, and I once invited my classmates after school to play a game of hide and seek in the college that my dad used to teach at. They didn't have their own buildings, so they rented out one for 2 levels of an office building, so there must be some history to it or something. There were still some college students around, so we decided to play in an area in the far end of the building. We chose the seeker and then we started the game. Since there is just a limited space where we could play, we decided to all hide together in one room. It was a rarely used computer room at the end of the balcony hallway. The others, they hid under the tables and even above them, since every table has a sort of separator for privacy and can keep them hidden. So me and my classmate Kurt, we did the same. We both went under the table, and there was another classmate hiding in front of us facing us so we could all see each other. Kurt went under the table with me and was sort of giggling the whole time, curled up, covering his face like in a sulking position. It was then that I noticed, though, that he was weirdly pale. He was brown-skinned. I asked him to quieten down, but he just wouldn't listen. I was shaking him, trying to make him stop, and he just kept giggling until the seeker found all three of us. After we got found, we went out and stood up, and there we saw our confused classmate Kurt, confused as to how he was found by the seeker under the table sitting beside me when he was actually on the top of the table, curled up, and was not sitting with me at all. We were all confused, so we looked under the table where we hid, and there was nobody there. I asked our classmate hiding in front of us if he saw him hiding with me, and he confirmed that he saw him giggling in a sulking manner. We both couldn't see his face, but the rest of the appearance was all exactly like Kurt, like the Kurt that we know. We asked the seeker how he saw everything, and he said that he never saw anybody on top of the table, but under the table were me and Kurt. We were both there. After a moment of realization, we ran out of that room as fast as we could. They went home, and I stayed at the room where my dad and his co-teachers are. After I told them what happened, they told us that apparently a student from some past college, who unfortunately self-deleted, he was at the balcony in front of that room where we played in. This was the closest encounter that I've had with anything paranormal before. I've had a few more, I think at least, and I always couldn't see their faces, which, I don't know, is probably better, I guess. Still, it's really just so unreal to me, and I always think about how something like this is possible. It makes me somehow feel glad that I was not the only one who saw it, because, quite honestly, if I was, I probably would have thought that I was hallucinating or that I was going crazy. When I was younger, we moved into a really old house. The property, it had history. There used to be a different house on the top of it even, but some kind of drug lab that had been set up in the basement of the house, apparently it exploded. That's based on what the landlord told us anyway. I'm not 100% sure if it's even true. But a lot of weird things happened in that house. The earliest memory that I had was I was laying in bed one night. I must have been around 11 or 12, and I felt something start to push on the bottom of my mattress, to the point that I felt the mattress lift off the metal bed frame it was on before it just suddenly dropped. I jumped out of bed and immediately went and got my mum. She checked and there was nothing there. Said I was imagining it, and she just sent me back to bed. A few weeks later, I remembered my sister talking about an old lady in our room. I asked her what she was talking about, and she said at night there was an old lady who sat in the chair in our room and talked to us. I never personally saw it, but I did believe her. My little brother's room was the worst of them all, though. He said that he constantly heard things at night and that his toys would even move. I was the only one who believed him for a while, but one night his Elmo doll that made noise just wouldn't stop going off. So we took the batteries out and it stopped for a while, but in the middle of the night it started right up again. I was the first one to be able to hear it through the wall, and so I went in there. He was freaking out, crying on his bed, and sure enough, in the middle of his floor, the Elmo doll that we took the batteries out of was on and playing music. The third and final experience that I had in this house, it was the one that solidified the thought that it was haunted, and was one night when I woke up. I heard something in our walk-in closet. I looked up and I just see a little boy carrying a blanket walking out of the closet. His face wasn't very clear, but he didn't seem to acknowledge me really. He walked to the edge of my sister's bed, sat down, and that's all I really remember. I think I either must have fallen back to sleep after that, or maybe passed out or something. But I thought about this for a long time. We moved apartments a lot, and I constantly remembered hearing things, feeling like I was getting random little touches. I remember one day I was sitting in my room in one of our old apartments, and clear as day I hear a little girl's voice saying hi behind me. When I turned around, there was no one and nothing there. I remember hearing multiple times my mum's voice and her calling for me when she wasn't even home. One day I had a dream, and a sudden black figure is the best way to describe it, appeared in it, and it woke me up immediately, and when I opened my eyes, there it was, right next to my bed. I sat up and practically screamed, but when I blinked, it was gone. No one else in my house seemed to experience these things, only ever me, but even then, when I was in my room at night, every time I turned the lights off, I always just felt watched. I think the most recent one, though, was I was sitting in my living room one night playing games at around 2 a.m. To be fair, it was pretty dark in the room, but I looked over, and just around the corner, I swear that I saw something move in the shadows. I ignored it at first because I knew that I could just be a little paranoid sometimes. But the second time, it was for sure moving. A tall shadow figure, almost reaching the ceiling, kind of leaned out of the shadowy corner and waved at me. Once again, the room is dark, so I can barely see this, but I literally sat there and stared because I thought that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I saw it move so clearly. My heart dropped out of my chest, and I jumped up to my feet quickly, turned on every light that I could, and I just was in panic, I guess. I told my mum and asked her if she had gotten up at all that night, and she told me no and just kind of rolled her eyes at me like she always does, told me that I was being paranoid and to go to sleep. But I feel like either all of this is real or maybe it's just paranoia or something. But the weird thing is that I just moved about 5 hours from the area that I grew up in, and when I did, it all just seems to have stopped. I don't feel watched anymore, I'm not having any weird dreams, no slamming doors, voices, or seeing figures. It all just stopped. I really don't know what it is, but I should probably mention that I've seen plenty of psychiatrists through the years. This isn't a mental thing at all, and I have anxiety, but literally that's it. For a long time, schizophrenia seemed like maybe a reason for some of this, but trust me, it's definitely been ruled out. In fact, it's been ruled out many times. But to note as well, during this time I did have a lot of mental health issues surrounding depression, I suppose. Since I was 12, I've been known to have sort of random extreme bouts of depression that have led me to being hospitalized at least 3 times. And I do think that my mental issues are somehow related to some of my experiences, but certainly not all of them. Again, I have no idea what these things are or what's going on, but I just thought that I should share this. I lived in the Appalachian Mountains my whole life, where the woods are thick, tangled, and full of mystery. Growing up there felt like stepping back in time. We had no cell phones or gadgets to distract us, just the endless expanse of forest as our playground and our imaginations as our guide. My best friend Madison and I would spend hours exploring the dense woods behind my house, following animal tracks, climbing trees, and discovering hidden creeks. In autumn, when the leaves turned fiery shades and fell, revealing clearer paths, we'd push a little deeper each day. We'd mark our bases in the most secret nooks we stumbled upon, pretending that we were the first explorers to find them. But no matter how brave we felt, we always stayed close enough to see my house in the distance. Until one day, when the forest just felt a little more inviting, a little less ordinary, and curiosity must have got the better of us. So we brought some twine and some other supplies that day, winding it around tree trunks so that we could find our way back. We kept walking, deeper than we'd ever gone before, until we reached a strange old tree that sort of split in two, like a giant slingshot rising from the ground. Right next to it, half hidden in the hillside beneath a pile of leaves and branches, was a rusty handle. As we brushed away the leaves, we realized that it was attached to a heavy wooden door embedded in the earth as if it had always been there, waiting. Hearts pounding, Madison and I both tugged on the handle, and the door finally broke open, revealing steps leading down into pitch-black darkness. Madison looked at me, unsure, but we felt compelled to go down and check it out. Maybe it was the mystery or the thrill of finding something forgotten like this. Whatever the case may have been, we didn't hesitate. The air down there was thick and damp as we descended. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a cramped room. In the middle of the floor lay a single worn photograph. I held it up to our flashlight and froze. It showed two children, both girls, standing in front of a house that looked eerily like mine. The girls' eyes were so dark and their grins twisted, a little too wide almost. Madison and I looked at each other, sort of panicked, and then we bolted back up the steps, leaving the photo behind us. When we reached the top, we looked around, and that was when we noticed that our path of twine was gone, as if someone or something had unraveled it. We blindly ran back through the forest, finally reaching my house. We burst through the front door, breathless and wide-eyed, my parents immediately noticing that something was wrong. We tried to explain what we found: the strange door in the hillside, the steps, and the photograph. My mum's face tightened with concern, but my dad, always the skeptic, shook his head and sort of laughed at it. But when he saw that we were serious, they agreed to come with us, though I could tell that they thought that it was just a kid's overactive imagination. With my parents in tow, we spent what felt like hours retracing our steps through those woods, following what we remembered of the path. We finally spotted the twisted, slingshot-shaped tree standing exactly where we'd found it before, and at that, my heart leapt. But when we scoured the area around it, there was no sign of the door anywhere. No rusty handle, no disturbed leaves, just bare earth and untouched forest floor. It was like the whole thing had never even existed. My dad muttered something about kids and their stories, but as we walked back home, I caught a worried look in my mum's eyes. Madison and I exchanged a glance too, and in that moment, we knew that we'd experienced something no one else would ever believe. Even now, 15 years later, Madison and I can't shake the memory of that day. We've gone back to those woods more than once, trying to find any trace of that hidden door, but it's as if it just never existed. We have no explanation for what we saw that day, no way of making any sense of it either. Every time I visit home and glance up at the woods, a chill always creeps up my spine, and I almost expect to see the door just waiting there, half buried and forgotten, just as we left it. And no matter how hard I've tried to forget it, I can still see that eerie photo in my mind. The eyes, the strange grin, like it's burned into my memory. So there was a time in my life where I was running weed from Mexico up to Tucson. I was arrested several times, and this is what happened during the last time that I was arrested. So I was arrested and then spent some time in a federal cell in Tucson. I had a top bunk next to the guy that ran the 2-for-1 store. His name was Carl. Now, when I was in high school, I read a story in the March 4th, 1966 issue of Life magazine about a guy that killed some people in Tucson. He was called the Pied Piper, and his name was Charles Schmid. That article reported some details that stuck in my head, and this is important. So Carl rolls over one day and tells me he was out in the desert practicing with his guns. Carl was a hitman and that's why he was in jail. He tells me that he was coming back when he sees this girl along the side trail. She's wearing a bathrobe and Carl describes it pretty much the same way as the article. And then Carl says that he can see the desert through a hole in her head. She's saying, help me, and he realizes that she's an apparition, so he walks on. Sometime later, he's going back out to shoot his guns when he sees some guys digging in the trail that he was on. Now, Charles Schmid was one of the only mass murderers that was ever convicted of a murder where the body wasn't found. After his conviction, he led authorities to the location of the body, which happened to be in or about the trail where Carl saw the apparition. Carl was a quiet and dead serious type. When you're behind bars, you get a feel for the types around you as well. You could tell that Carl played for keeps, and he wasn't the type to beat you up, but he would kill you. To illustrate that point too, there was an incident in the cell where something happened in a card game. One guy was facing off with about 6 to 8 Mexicans. The guy was a big, strong, crazy type, but only one guy. He called Carl to help him, and the Mexicans just sort of disappeared into their bunks. They would fight the crazy guy, but not Carl. He just had this aura about him. I had related this story a few times over the years, but I thought that it would fit here as well, so I thought that I should share it. My old house in Lakemore, it was a decent house. Well, all except for the basement. Specifically only one side too. Now, my dad is not easily scared by much, but this was one of the few things that actually did. So when I was really little, I used to see this figure in my room every night. His name was Joe. Obviously, there's no person in the room, but I was absolutely positive at that time that I saw something. This happened 2 nights in a row, and then my dad finally noticed. He would start asking me questions about the figure. Joe, he would ask, is Joe nice? Yeah, I would say. What does Joe do? He sings to me. What is he singing? You are my sunshine. Does Joe like Mummy? Yeah. Does Joe like Daddy? Silence. More silence, and Joe doesn't like Daddy. Does Joe want to hurt Daddy? More silence. A light headshake of yes. Don't worry, Joe won't hurt Daddy. Now later that night, my mum and dad discussed this issue that went on for weeks. They thought about taking me to a doctor, but that wouldn't help anything really. It went away for about a week anyways, but then one night, at like 2:30 in the morning, I came sprinting out of my room hyperventilating, saying, I see somebody, over and over again. My dad's thoughts at the time were, what the heck? That night I say, Daddy, Joe is walking to you. My dad then turns to my mum. He mouthed, what the heck, silently. After that, nothing really happened, and they just took me back to bed. So skip forward ahead, summer of 2015. We are now moving out after that stuff, and my dad is cleaning, when the TV turns on out of nowhere. The remote is in the kitchen, and my mum was outside mowing the lawn, but it turns off by itself as well. On and off again, and now it turns back on, and so does the PlayStation. Then they both turn off. We stood there watching this and were just dumbfounded by what we saw. Once we moved out, my dad stayed in the house by himself for about a year. He came home from work for lunch one day, and he sits at the top of the basement stairs, and he starts playing guitar and singing a bit. He then hears a little girl's voice harmonizing with him. He stops and nothing. He plays again and it happens again. Then he stops and it stops too, and later that day he tries again after work, but it never happens again. 2 months later, he's in the kitchen making oatmeal and he feels a distinct tap on his shoulder. He turns around startled and there's nothing. He continues to make food and he feels a slight tug on his shirt. Now he's freaked out and jerks around, but there's nothing. But then he hears a super faint whisper, "Mario." Mind you, Mario is my dad's name. And upon hearing that, he quickly scurried out of there. Later that day, he's doing the laundry in the basement and the light on the other side of the room turns off. He pretty much says heck no to that and runs upstairs. He had a dream that night of a house in the 1800s in the same house that he lived in. There was a young girl named Ernie, short for Ernstella. Her dad would often take her to the basement to whip her if she misbehaved. In the dream, one time she was beat to death. Then as the dream started to end, he heard whispers saying, help me," over and over again. The next day, he calls his friend, who just so happens to be a certified ghost hunter. He got an EVP mic set up and gave it to my dad to borrow. He didn't set it up for a few weeks, but once he heard random bangs in the basement, he knew that something was up, so he finally set it up, and the next day, he finds a loud growling noise in the recording. He then went downstairs behind the stairs to find a boarded off area, sort of made of drywall. He unscrewed it all, and when he took it down, a whoosh of cold air hit him really fast, he says. Then the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he ran up those stairs the fastest that he'd ever run. His friend told him to board it up and to never go down there again. He did this, but he first shined a flashlight in there. It all looked pretty well lit up until he hit one corner where, for whatever reason, it just didn't seem to light up from the light. He went down later to sage the space and write a Bible psalm on the wall to command whatever was down there out. The banging continued for several nights, though. Now, after all of this, one day he just had enough. He went down with Sage and started yelling random commands to get out like a maniac. And after that, surprisingly, nothing else happened. He went to get the records on the house because he was curious, and the only records is that it was built in the 1920s and that my parents bought it in 2010. Him and the agent both thought that it was weird, especially because they discovered that there were apparently records, but they went missing in 1999. The only thing that they found in that place is that the house was built on a Native American epic battleground in the ancient times. A lot of people died there and were buried there too, apparently. He eventually moved in with us after that, and thankfully, no other things have happened ever since then. Trauma is never a big deal until you are one with it. And honestly, I'm scared to death hearing all of the stuff that my dad told me. And I just really hope that it's all over now. So this happened a while ago now when I was still pretty young. I'd say around 2010 to 2012 maybe. My family and I went to go and visit some family out in a more rural part of my city. It was pretty much the outskirts where it was still a lot of bush, but yeah, there were some people around. My parents would often go there to drink on the weekends while I just sort of hung out with my cousins, and considering that fact, we always slept over. Now, before I go on, let me paint a bit of a picture of the situation. Basically, they had a very long yard in length that was surrounded by fence with a deck in the back that stretched out long enough to see the main road out front. It had a small shed in the front yard, and behind the shed was their trampoline. I should add too that this shed was very small, and that you could look over it and see the main road in fact. Out on the main road was just a bunch of trailer homes lined up on the road that just sort of went straight for maybe a few kilometers. Anyway, it was about midnight and my cousin and I were on the trampoline just being kids. We were probably playing some made-up game, but my uncles and parents would often go out to the back deck to have a smoke. So as usual, we hear them all come out and they're just laughing and being distracted by whatever they're talking about. My uncle hears us being a little loud and was ready to come and tell us to be quiet, but before he could tell us to stop, he goes, "What the heck?" My cousin and I thought that we were in trouble, so we immediately look over to him. He then continues to say, "Who the heck is that? Hey Pat, come and look at this." Pat was my dad. As we're staring at him, we realize that he wasn't looking at us. He was looking off to the main road in the front. My cousin and I, being curious, we look over to the main road as my dad walks over to my uncle. And there was a very old lady with short grey hair, with what looked like to be a hospital gown and blue slippers. She was quite literally just standing there, watching my cousin and I play. Since we were so distracted, I guess we never even noticed her, so I can't say how long she had been standing there for. My dad yells, "Hey, who are you?" with my mum and other uncles also coming to look. With that, she began to slowly walk away, and I mean real slow. My uncle tells us to go inside as they start walking towards the gate at the front of the yard to confront her. My cousin and I, being the little turds that we were, got off the trampoline but stayed to see the commotion. My uncle and dad walk out to the main road to find that she had just sort of, well, disappeared. They both say, "Wait, where did she just go?" Me being confused, I also walk out of the gate to see it for myself, and to my shock, she was nowhere to be seen. Like I said earlier, this road was just straight and pretty long, so their guess was that she snuck into somebody's yard, but with her being that slow and old, it was hard to make sense of it because all of these trailer homes had decently tall fences, and that was really the only way to enter. My dad then calls out, "Is anyone there?" and obviously nobody answers. I begin to get a little bit creeped out by this, and at that point, I must admit that I was pretty scared too. My dad and uncle take us inside and begin trying to make sense of what the heck just happened. My uncle, who lived there, said that he didn't recognize her and has never seen her around before. They ask us if we saw her there before, and we say no, but I explain that she was wearing like a hospital gown and slippers. We all thought how odd for an old lady in slippers to be walking around so late at night in a rural area like this, where a lot of coyotes come in and out of as well. I mean, surely someone that age would be asleep in her home, or if she wanted some fresh air, she'd just stay on her deck or something. There was just really no making sense of the situation, until my uncle said that the mental hospital was not far, but far enough for it to be quite a walk, especially for an older lady like this. They started speculating that, heck, maybe she'd escaped, hence why she was in a hospital gown. I mean, maybe she did live in the area but had dementia or something. With all of that said, it just still didn't make sense that she just disappeared after not even 60 seconds had gone by. It really creeped my cousin and I out, and we never went out there that late at night again, nor did we ever see her again, thankfully. Everyone I tell this story to also has a hard time making sense of it, so if anyone has any possible explanations or has gone through a similar experience, then please do let me know, because I still often think about this. So I'm not really a believer of the paranormal or anything. I've always found it interesting, I'll admit, but I've always been skeptical. Well, at least until after last night, and now I'm really not sure what to believe. This story happened on November 3rd at around 4:30 a.m. So I had just gotten out of a relationship with my ex. For the sake of keeping her anonymous, I'm going to call her V. Now, V and I were in a relationship for a year and a half before we had mutually agreed to end things. Still wanting to be there for each other though, we both agreed that we'd still want to be friends. Now, on November 3rd, we planned on hanging out at the beach, so that's what we did. We went to the beach and we had some fun. Freshly broken up, feelings were still there obviously. I'd be lying if I said that we didn't kiss or hug or anything like that. But after the beach, I dropped V off at home and I went home myself. We called, and texted full of excitement because of our day of being with each other again. Then I tried to be funny, and I made a bit of a joke about how I should sneak over to V's later that night and we'd go for a night walk. Stupid teenager things, I know, but anyway, that's really what happened in the end. She didn't fully know that I would show up, but she knew that I was serious about it. So I took an Uber at around 2 in the morning and I showed up. I snuck over to her window and woke her up. Confused and tired, V agreed to come on a night walk with me. We began walking and we talked a bit. Of course, there was still some underlying feelings between us because we had started talking about it. And as we continued walking, I turned down the street that led to the park, hoping that we could just sit and talk for a bit. But V suddenly froze. She told me that it was a bad idea to go to the park and that she had a weird feeling about it. So we just continued to walk around her neighborhood instead. V and I got back to her house, and by that time we had gotten into an argument. Well, not an argument, I guess, but more so we were talking about how maybe being friends isn't healthy for us right now. We stood outside and poured our hearts out, both hurting and in pain. And it was around this time that we started hearing things, like footsteps. Ignoring it, we continued to talk, but the more we talked, the more we started feeling hurt and vulnerable, I guess, and the more the noises started getting louder too. We began to hear footsteps from all directions, movement seen from the corner of our eyes. Suddenly, V stops. She slowly walks to me and whispers, "I think someone is out here with us." Then we heard something move, like the crunch of a leaf. We jolted and looked around, but there was nothing. Now, it's this next part that it still freaks me out. So after hearing that sound, we began to hear this noise, like music. But it wasn't music, really. I mean, maybe it could have been, but in a different language, in a different genre that I'd never heard of. But it wasn't really music. It sounded more like an imitation of it, I guess. I turned to V, and the look on her face was full of fear. She hugged me, and this feeling was like nothing I'd ever felt before. Just absolute dread, and it was sickening right down to my stomach. V let go, and we both knew what we had to do. She ran back to the side of her house, where her window is, and I followed. But the music, or whatever it was, got louder. I suddenly couldn't really think straight too, and all I felt was dread. As the music got closer, I told V to get down. And this is the next part of the story where I genuinely need some answers from. So I pulled out my small pocket knife and I told V to call the police. The music was now getting louder, and it was like almost an itch or an urge suddenly came upon me. Something was pulling me to it. Something in my brain was telling me to go to the noise, but I thought, why would I think that? It was really loud, like it was filling up my brain, and I just couldn't really think straight anymore. The only thing that I knew to do was keep V safe. The music sounded like it was only a couple of yards away from us now, and that something was there. I began to tell V to call the police, and she pulled out her phone and just sort of froze. I kept repeating myself, but she just wouldn't cooperate. The music got louder and I couldn't hear anything. V suddenly began to dial 911 and she stopped. V then turned her phone off and put it down. In that moment, I felt like it was over. The noise was getting closer, my brain couldn't think, I felt really scared and weak all of a sudden. I knew what needed to happen, but if it was going to approach us, I knew V was going to be kept safe. I knew what needed to happen. This instinctual feeling came out of me, and I don't even know if I was controlling myself or what, but I grabbed V's hand and I said, "You need to call the police now." And honestly, it looked like she had woken up from a trance or sleep or something. V opened her phone and began to dial the police, but when she did, it stopped. The noise stopped and the feeling just suddenly went away. The rest of the morning is a bit of a blur really, but we tried to describe what happened to the police, but of course they didn't believe us. I eventually called an Uber and I helped her back into her window. I went back home and we called. We tried to gather our thoughts and we came up with some sort of an explanation. It's later in the day now and quite honestly I'm still shaken up by this whole thing. I know that this is a really weird story and trust me, I know that it sounds crazy, but I would really, really love someone to clarify what the heck this was. So if you have any inkling as to what this might have been, anything at all, then please, do not be afraid to share it because I would love to hear from you. I want to preface this with saying that I've hunted and hiked in the region since I was 9 years old. In other words, I am very familiar with the wildlife and the sounds of the forest here. I'm not really a believer in any of this sort of thing, but I just don't really have an explanation for what happened tonight. So I hiked about 1.5 miles through forest and swamp, hunting deer today, and got to the pocket of woods and a field that I wanted to be in, and climbed a tree to hunt out of. By all accounts, this was an uneventful afternoon and evening until sundown. For about 30 straight minutes, I listened to a rabbit be tortured and just wouldn't die. If you'd heard a dog or a hawk get a rabbit or hunted rabbits, then you know what I'm talking about. When they're distressed, they scream bloody murder, and this just seemed to continue forever. Naturally, this can make you on edge, but I figured that a hawk got it and was just killing it. But then, the sound of a twig snapping and silence. The rabbit had stopped. Through the thicket, I could make out a figure, vaguely deer-shaped, moving through the woods at about 35 yards away, so I grabbed my bow, but the undergrowth is far too thick for me to pick out much more than a rough outline. It walked behind a tree and disappeared. The sun is now fully set, and I'm in like the last 15 minutes of post-sundown light. And that's when I hear in a flat, emotionless child's voice, coming from where that deer disappeared, "Help," over and over again. No fluctuation or distress to the voice, not said as if it was asking for help, but just a statement. "Help, help," over and over again. It must have said that probably 15 times, and then the woods went silent. There wasn't even a breeze to make a sound now. Then a crack of a limb off of a tree snapping, and at that, all hell broke loose in those woods. Squirrels, birds, and deer suddenly shot out of this wood like bats out of hell, sounding like an absolute stampede through the forest. And then suddenly, silence again. To make things worse for me, I lost my hat-clipped light on the walk in and had to haul butt 1.5 miles through the woods back to my truck in complete darkness, my path only lit up by tonight's full moon. Anyway, I went back to the woods this morning. Last night after getting back to my truck, I called a few friends to let them know what had happened, and then had a relatively sleepless night to boot. This morning I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I decided that I needed to return. I grabbed my hunting dog, called up a buddy to come with me, and set out back to those woods. First, I drove around the property, but nobody was parked at any trailhead, so there shouldn't be anyone around. We took a long way around, heading north to get to the woods though. A few miles from the parking area, stopped to talk, looked for animal signs, and listened as we go. We approached the woods from the south, keeping on the outside of it all in a tall, grassy, wet field. As we approached within 200 or so yards of where I had heard it last night, we stopped to talk for a moment and to plan how best to go about entering the woods. This isn't some sort of manicured forest, by the way, that's easy to walk in on. The undergrowth is dense and filled with thorny shrubs and buckthorn. Whereas yesterday and in the weeks past, this area was teeming with life. Deer, pheasants, hundreds of turkeys and their poults, crows, squirrels, and rabbits. Today, the woods here in the fields were completely silent. And as we discussed this, it was then that I realized that my dog was nowhere to be seen or heard. She normally wears a bell, or at least the metal pieces of her collar are sufficient for me to hear where she is, but it is completely silent. She wears an e-collar that I can press a button that will make a beeping noise that I can hear, and I press that button and there's silence. I yelled for her, but there was silence. Then, coming from the forest ahead of me, I hear the yelping of my dog in pain, loud and clearly my dog. I look at my friend and take off towards the woods, calling and beeping the collar and calling and beeping again, but it was back to silence. I look at my buddy and he asks, "What are you doing?" as if he hadn't heard it. We stop and wait for a moment on the edge of the woods. I call one more time and finally hear the jingle of her collar coming up to me, but completely unharmed and from the opposite direction of where I thought that I'd heard her crying. Confused, we distanced ourselves from the woods again and continued north along the edge. Again, we neither heard or saw any wildlife. We found a few spots where things were recently killed, staining the ground with rotted blood, but no signs of anything living. Eventually, we turned back, and as we crossed the same spot that I thought that I'd heard my dog, my friend stopped, looked at me in a panic and said, "Oh, your dog," and took off running to the woods. I called after him asking what he was doing, and he said that he'd heard her clearly crying in pain in the woods and was confused when I said that I had heard nothing. It was just the same as when we had first walked by and I was the one who'd heard it. I could see my dog in the opposite direction smelling around, totally unharmed and not distressed at all. I called to my friend that the dog is fine and was over by me, and at that, we decided to rush out. Now, for those that might ask what else may it be, I have heard my dog yelping before, and I can assure you that that was definitely it. It doesn't sound anything like coyotes or wolves or anything like that, and I definitely won't be returning to that area ever again. I was 9 years old when me and my little brother, 5 and male, were invited to a sleepover. My mother, she had just become acquainted with a man from a church, whom spoke of his children wonderfully. I remember him saying that he had them for the weekend due to custody. When we arrived, we asked about the children. Turns out, though, that they were arriving sometime soon. The man invited us to the pool, and so we spent part of the day chilling and playing in the pool. When the sun went down, we decided to head back in and take a shower. I made sure to stick by my baby brother while the man was in the living room. I didn't trust the man for some reason. I also remember thinking about the children. I don't remember seeing any kid pictures or anything like that, not even on his phone's background. I think by then that it was clear that there were no children coming. In fact, no children ever existed. I remember that there was a Wii that we spent most of the night playing, but no children were ever seen. I don't remember much after that, other than telling my mother that we never saw any children. Of course, she was spooked, and never left us alone at church ever again. And also, we never saw that man ever again. This happened years ago, and now I'm a 19-year-old boy, and reliving the memories of the man with no children inviting us for a sleepover really creeps me out. So I live in Australia. It was 2017. After a long late class at university, I was walking home dead tired and just wanted to collapse into bed. The streets were quiet, just the occasional flickering streetlight accompanied me as I walked home. As I got closer to my place, I noticed someone slouched in my doorway, A figure sort of huddled up against the door, wrapped in layers of worn-out clothes. As I got nearer, I realized that it was a woman, most likely homeless. Her face was hidden beneath a tattered hat. But then she looked up and our eyes met. Her face was tired, but her eyes were intense, as if she was guarding that spot for dear life. I froze. Slowly, she raised a beat-up walking stick and pointed it at me, her grip tight. Suddenly, she snapped. "Get out!" her voice rough and firm. And her teeth, oh my goodness, were completely yellow and rotten. The kind of teeth that you would genuinely see in zombie movies. The threat, it felt real. She was clearly ready to use the stick if I took another step. I took a cautious step forward, my mind racing. It was my place after all. But she seemed so tense and defensive. I wanted to say something to calm her down, but words failed me. Before I could even say a word, she hit my head hard twice with her stick. Instinct took over and I turned, walked quickly, almost running, back down the street. A couple of blocks away was the university security station, and I practically stumbled in, trying to catch my breath. I told the officer on duty about the woman on my porch and asked if someone could come with me. The officer nodded, maybe a little bit perplexed, but he came along. When we got back to my place, though, the porch was now empty. She was gone. The officer did a quick look around and just shrugged. "Looks like she moved on," he said, giving me a reassuring nod before heading back to the station. I thanked him, relieved but definitely still on edge. The whole thing happened so quickly, but I felt like I'd been holding my breath the entire time. But even after she was gone, I just couldn't quite shake it. For weeks, every time I came home after dark, I found myself bracing as I got close to the door, half expecting to see her sitting there, eyes glaring up at me with those rotten teeth showing. I started leaving the porch light on, checking the lock twice before bed, just in case. It wasn't so much about feeling unsafe, I guess. I just couldn't forget her face, that fierce, weary look, or the way that she guarded my doorway like it was her last refuge. The memory, it stuck with me. Now and then I wonder what happened to her, whether she ever thought about that night again, or if I was just another stranger in her endless drift through the city. A few years ago, I, a 35-year-old male, had a terrifying experience that still haunts me today. I was living in a busy city at the time, and I had just finished a late shift at work. It was around 10 p.m., and I was walking home through the quieter side streets of my neighborhood. I'm someone who's always been somewhat cautious, I guess you could say, so I was alert, keeping an eye out for any unusual activity. As I walked down the street, I noticed a guy about 20 feet behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. He seemed like just another person walking the same route. But something about his movements just caught my attention, I guess. He wasn't walking in a normal manner. He was clearly trying to keep his distance, but his pace matched mine, no matter how fast or slow I went. After a few blocks, I decided to take a detour. I turned onto a side street that was a little less populated, hoping that he wouldn't follow. I checked over my shoulder and, sure enough, he was still there. It's hard to describe, but I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up instantly. My instincts told me that something just wasn't right. I crossed the street, hoping that that would throw him off. But he crossed too without hesitation. I thought, okay, this is weird now. I had to make a decision though. I wasn't that far from home, but something about this guy's persistence made me uncomfortable. So I decided to stop at a nearby 24/7 convenience store to try to lose him. The store was empty, save for the cashier, who barely looked up from their phone. I quickly grabbed a drink and stood by the door, hoping to see if the guy would pass by. He didn't. He stopped right outside of the store. At this point, I could see his face clearly through the glass, and he was staring directly at me. I panicked and ran back into the aisles, trying to calm myself down. I could hear his footsteps growing louder as he approached the door. I couldn't stay here any longer, so I tried to pay, but I was so rattled that I couldn't focus on anything. The cashier just sort of stared at me, probably wondering why I looked so frantic. I threw the drink on the counter, paid quickly, and bolted out the door. I ran down another street, not wanting to look back, but knowing that I had to. I didn't see him for a while, and my heart slowly started to calm down. But as I turned the corner to my street, that was when I saw him again, standing at the far end of the block. And quite honestly, it was like he had been waiting there the whole time. I really wasn't sure what to do next. I considered calling the police, but he hadn't really done anything illegal, just followed me for a while. I didn't want to overreact, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. He was still standing there, watching me, and now he was closer. I took a deep breath, checked both ways, and made a beeline for my apartment building, not daring to look back until I was inside. When I got into my apartment, I locked the door and stayed there, staring out the window for what felt like hours. I didn't see him again after that night, but the whole experience really left me unsettled for weeks. I never felt comfortable walking home alone late at night after that too, even though I've lived in the city my entire life. I still wonder if I was just being paranoid, but there was something off about the way that he followed me. It felt intentional, and it left me with a gut feeling that I just cannot shake. Yesterday, my wife wakes up at about 2:30 in the morning while freaking out. She woke up to our 9-year-old, non-verbal son putting his face against hers. Then she went back to sleep later, and quickly woke up to a Mexican song all about life being pointless playing on repeat in her head, followed by hearing a voice of "kill yourself" being heard. She was reasonably scared and wakes me up every time that she gets freaked out, so we stayed up a little bit and then went back to sleep together later. Tonight, the following day, I wake up at about the same time, but I get a repeat of Britney Spears' "Hit Me Baby," but only the line of "my loneliness is killing me" for 5 straight minutes playing in my head in an almost outwardly audible fashion. I was a little bit scared at first, but I just tried to go back to sleep and ignore it. But then, I heard the little trampoline springs next to me creak loudly, as if someone had got onto it. I'm currently sitting alone and scared to sleep when I can usually brush these things off. By the way, I've been sleeping on the couch recently because my kid has also been trying to escape out of the door next to it in the middle of the night. We have bought locks and alarms, but I just still don't feel safe without being there to protect him. I can assure you too that I never listened to Britney Spears, so I was kind of shocked that that song popped into my head. I also woke up extremely hot and sweaty despite it being cold in the living room. As soon as I put on my sweater out of habit, my sweater cooled me to my core instead of heating me up as well, which was really weird. When I experience stuff like this, I usually get angry on purpose and talk out loud against the negative energy that I'm feeling. I do this because that has helped every time in the past against falling into fear to weird occurrences like this. Anyway, I can't sleep and I'm having a tough time understanding any of this. My wife last night, when she experienced her situation, kept saying that a demon is here. She and I are both atheists though, and I tried my best to explain to her that this was all from stress and that she had recently just heard the song in the car that day, so it was all just in her head. She seemed to buy the explanation, so she was able to sleep soon after. Now the same thing has happened to me, but with a song that I haven't heard in ages. And I've woken up with songs playing in my head obviously before, like anyone, but they always go through the whole song in a continuous stretch. Having the song only play a single and very disturbing phrase definitely is a little bit weird. Like I said, I don't really believe in this stuff, but it almost seems like I was being mocked maybe. Especially because I was out here alone, but I've been fine with it. My loneliness is killing me, as if me being alone would lead to something being able to easily kill me or something. I didn't interpret it as the original lyrics obviously meant for 1 second. I interpreted it as if something was preying on me due to me currently being alone. And well, that's it. I apologize if it's a bit jumbled, but it's due to a lack of sleep, and I would really like your opinions on what this might be. Is it all just in our heads, or is there something more going on here? In 2016, I was a junior in high school. I didn't live far from school, but it was still about an hour's walk. I was in pretty good shape back then, I guess you could say, and didn't mind the walk when my older sibling couldn't pick me up due to work. My parents were both at work too, and I hated asking friends for rides because it just felt sort of bummy. Anyway, I started to walk home on a nice September day in Florida. About 5 minutes down the road, I got the feeling like someone was looking at me, and I turned around. And standing there, about 50 feet away, was a clown. This was back when the killer clown sightings were at an all-time high. It was late September, so I just assumed it was an early Halloween prank and shrugged it off. I turned back around and kept going. Another 5 minutes went by, and I couldn't shake the feeling a clown was following me. Again, I turned around, and he was about 30 to 40 feet away now. I was, needless to say, pretty nervous at this point. I turned back around when I heard a snap, and next to me, just inside the brush between subdivisions, was another clown. It was clear that this wasn't a prank anymore. Sensing that I was in danger, I started sprinting when the first one from behind me ran too, saying, "Grab him." The second clown chased after me too. I could clearly hear their footsteps behind me. I scanned the nearby houses and thankfully saw a police cruiser in a driveway. I got there and banged in the door until someone answered. The cop, seeing me shaken up, looked around and saw one of the two holding a decently sized hunting knife and told them to freeze. They both bolted, and after that I just ran, and I never heard anything about their capture or anything. To this day, clowns still unsettle me, and I cannot see a picture of any of them, whether it be a party clown or Pennywise or whatever, without thinking back to the time that I possibly almost died. This week has been absolutely hectic for me. My 3 kids, they have the flu. Oldest was first, then my younger 2 caught it. After a visit to the clinic, I was heading to the CVS down the street from our house for their prescriptions. I decided last minute to drop my kids off at home with their dad so they could rest and I could go inside the store to pick up some medicine. I consider our neighborhood to be pretty safe. I've taken walks after dark and I've never felt afraid. Most of our neighbors are older folks who have lived there over a decade anyway. And when I pulled up to the CVS, I parked on the side parallel to our street. It's darker on that side, but the entrance is right around the corner and well lit. There was a man standing outside. He walked in front of my car and I could hear him talking, but my music was kind of loud. I figured that he was on a phone or something like that. No real red flags yet. My husband, He called me as the man walked back towards the corner adjacent to the entrance. I got out of my car, still on the phone, telling my husband, yeah, kiddos have the flu, I'm picking up medicine at the CVS, etc. In a very pleasant voice, though, the man then says to me, hey, I got a question for you. You know where the main street is? I, assuming that he's asking for directions or the location of something, tell him that I do. I'm still holding my phone to my ear. It's in a bright pink case, so I'm sure that he could see it. Now, this man is standing directly in front of me. There is a pillar and a trash can behind him. Around the corner is a propane cage and a red box against the store's wall. Getting past him would put me in arm's reach. Next, he asks for a ride there, though, to a homeless shelter. It's very cold outside, and he apparently doesn't want to freeze. I empathized with him, but said that I really couldn't. I offered to buy him gloves and or a blanket, and to ask if an employee in the store could assist finding him a ride. And man, this guy's face instantly changed to just pure rage. And then, right back to pleasant. Well, you know what happens to homeless people stuck outside, right? You're going to help me. It's right down the street. I'm standing there at that point, unsure what to do. My husband is on the phone asking what's going on. I gently tell the man that I don't feel comfortable doing that, and that I have the flu. I don't really. And my husband is on the phone with me. I don't care about the flu. Now, he's getting more angry, and not moving away from my route into the store. I didn't want to turn my back on him to go back to my car, which was several feet away in the dark at this point. While this guy is glaring at me, I decided to quickly walk past him. I had my mask from my clinic in my jacket pocket, so I pulled that out and held it in front of me while I moved towards the trash can. He looked disgusted, but kept telling me that I need to give him a ride. It's right down the street, he insisted. But I know where that street is, and it's not as close as he's making it out to be. He tried to guilt me, and his words felt threatening, but he didn't really actually threaten me verbally, I guess. Once I was around the corner, I rushed into the store, straight into the pharmacy. My husband then said that he's calling the police. He heard the way the man was talking to me and said to stay in the store. I'll admit that my knees were shaking. I'm not usually the type to be so afraid when confronted like this. When I got to the pharmacy, I interrupted the pharmacist and a customer apologizing, then told them what happened. The pharmacist sent the store manager out, tall guy with a long beard. Looked like he doesn't take much from people. The police, they'd already arrived. The man was told to leave, which he did momentarily. But soon he came back into the store, yelling obscenities and something about me. Now, the store manager told this guy to get out, that he was trespassing on the property. The cop came back to talk to me and told me that she has arrested him many times apparently. He's loud and likes to yell at people, but he allegedly isn't violent. The pharmacist had me hiding behind the screen where they give vaccines and left the half door to the pharmacy cracked open in case I needed to get out of there. The cop had also told me this guy's first and last name, as did the store manager. I'm wondering too, is that really normal? Anyway, the prescriptions are finally filled in and I leave the store. The police park next to my car to keep an eye on me. Oh, and the man refused a ride from the cop to the shelter in the end. Later on, I looked him up though. His name is unique, so he was easy to find online. And surprise, surprise, he has a long record spanning 3 states and several counties. Tons of public intoxication charges, DWI, urinating in public. But then, there were the assault and battery charges, and indecent exposure. I also looked up the homeless shelter, and yeah, as I thought, there isn't one where he wanted me to take him, but that area is definitely super sketchy. Earlier today, I went to the corner store across from the CVS and told my friend, the overnight shift employee, what happened. She kicks him out of the store and calls the police every time that she sees him because he yells and threatens customers apparently. But he always takes off before the police arrive. Now, I know that I could have handled that better. I was blindsided by his instant shift from pleasant to filled with rage, I guess. A big thank you to the pharmacy team, though, who kept me safe, and the store manager for confronting the creep as well. I mean, they really didn't have to do all that, but they did. I'm thankful, too, that my husband recognized that I was in an unsafe situation over the phone, because if the police hadn't arrived, I really don't know what would have happened. This man is still out there somewhere in my area, and I really, really hope that I do not run into him somewhere out there. I, a 16-year-old female, have recently changed schools and everything seemed to be fine. I've even made a few new friends and met with a few past friends that I already knew. Everything was going pretty great really, until, of course, something had to go wrong. For some context, I have a good friend there, but we're not that close to be like sharing things that are personal and all that. We just discuss things about school, studies, and things we both like. And here's where the story begins. In 2023, September, at the start of the school year, I had found a little spot for myself to sit at. It was outside and quiet, which I like because I'm extremely introverted. I've been at that place multiple times, usually sitting with my notebook, writing stuff and drawing. After a good long while of hanging out at this place, I started to notice that there was this student, always standing quite far away, sitting on his phone. At first, I didn't think too much of it, since he's not the only one who's hanging out at that spot, and there were other people sitting or walking around anyway. However, I've been getting this awful gut feeling that I'm being stared at in the middle of drawing or writing. Of course, again, I still didn't think much of it, since I kept thinking it was just me being paranoid. Plus, I mean, if it's a guy who just maybe wants to talk to me or something, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, I started sitting inside just to test that theory out, and where I was sitting there was a window, ground level from where you could see the whole place from below, but because it was ground level, no one would be interested to look at the windows. First 2 days, everything was fine, but on the third day, he stopped coming to that place, which definitely perked up my interest and kind of made my stomach feel a bit upset. Well, I went back to sit in my usual place, and he came back there. I had to pretend like I didn't notice him. It'd be safer if I just didn't acknowledge him. And in the end, I just stopped coming to that place entirely. And yes, while there's not much to that story, there's more. So, on a little break day that our teachers decided to give us, we hung outside all day and you were allowed to stay inside if you perhaps had the need for medical attention or something of that sort. I went to a very isolated place, different from the one that I've been coming to before. It was basically a parking lot near the school. I sat and, as usual, I was drawing and writing. In fact, I was so focused on my notebook that I just didn't even notice my surroundings. And to my shock, I heard a familiar voice not far away, literally over the car where I was sitting on the staircase. I heard that same voice of this creepy guy. I felt as if my inspiration ran dry at that point. My heart sort of fell to my stomach and I began to feel a bit nauseous. He was on a phone call or something, but before he was inside the school, going to the bathroom, and mind you, the parking lot is quite far away, and no one can really see where you're sitting unless they get closer, where I've never seen him on a phone call or never saw him using his phone there. Usually he was sitting at my favorite spot, which now I despise. But I told the teachers that I felt a bit sick, which was true, and they let me inside till we had to leave from the school. I wanted to talk to my new friend about it, who knows him and frequently talks to him apparently, but I feel like I'll say something inappropriate and he might actually distance himself from me. He's a great friend and I would hate to lose him, but I also want to do something to stop this matter from escalating because, I don't know, I just feel like I'm being stalked. I mean, maybe I'm going crazy, but the other day when I was walking home, I could have sworn that there were eyes on me. If I go and talk to the stalker himself, I feel like he'll sort of feel like he's finally been noticed or whatever, and maybe have a sense of victory that could encourage him to keep stalking me. I really don't know what to do other than to try to keep ignoring him, and I really don't want to give him any attention or notice him in the slightest, but the fear that he's going to do something even more creepy is making me feel scared when I attend school. I mean, I don't want this guy to, follow me home or something. I have a sneaking suspicion, too, that he's now following me outside of school because I could have swore that I saw him the other day. Again, maybe my mind is just playing tricks on me, but what do you guys think? Is there something more to this? And if so, what should I do? I've had a few paranormal experiences throughout my life, but this one popped up into my brain the other day and I've been thinking about it a lot and can't really explain what happened, so I thought that I would share. About 2 years ago in the dead of winter, my power went out. This was a big problem for me because I have a pet leopard gecko who requires heating elements to survive. It started getting very cold in my apartment very quickly, to the point where I became worried about my pet's safety and did the only thing that I could think to do, which was take my gecko to my car and crank the heater up. Normally we get a few power outages every winter in my area and they last maybe an hour or two. This time was different because the power did not come back on for 6 hours. After about an hour of sitting in my driveway, I got extremely bored and started driving around my neighborhood, which had some more rural areas that butted up against national forest. One of these areas is an absolutely beautiful overlook where you can see miles of the forest and also a few streetlights, so I'd be able to see if the power came back on. So I drove there and parked to enjoy the view. I'd had the heat running for a while at this point, and the car had gotten a bit hot, so I rolled down the window to let in some cool air and almost immediately started hearing something kind of far off at first. Kind of a weird sort of sad sounding howl, I guess, mixed with a sort of squawk. I assumed that this was an animal, but rolled up the window almost all of the way just in case. Over the next 20 minutes, the sound got progressively closer and closer to the car until it sounded like it was circling me. I can still hear this sound in my mind, clear as day, even though this happened several years ago. And I know what animals we had locally and what they sounded like. And this, whatever it was, didn't sound like any of them. I got nervous and decided to leave, and I go and get some food and gas in my neighboring town that still had power. About another hour passes and there's still no power. Having convinced myself that the sound was just an animal, and it had probably long since moved on, I went back to the overlook to enjoy my meal. About another hour goes by without anything happening. No noise, no nothing. Until eventually I see movement among the big rocks in front of me. It's starting to get dark, so I can't really make it out perfectly, but at one point, it looked like the head of a disfigured animal peered out at me over a rock and then disappeared. I see this several more times, but if it was an animal, there was something severely wrong with it, be it an injury or a birth defect, that would probably affect its quality of life. And I wanted to be able to let animal control know so they could find it, help it, or at least put it out of its misery if necessary, since it was clearly staying in that exact area. After a while, it starts making that noise again, the same one as before, but now it's also added this horrible gurgling, and it almost sounds human. At this point, it's gotten completely dark, and I can't see much of anything, but I can still hear it circling the car. Eventually, I hear what sounds like something messing around near the back tire, and I panic and peel out of the parking lot. And it was then that I looked behind me and see what is now very clearly a person in the taillights. They attempted to chase the car for a few feet, but they quickly gave up. Now, is it possible that this was just a person under the influence or suffering from a mental health issue? Yeah, it definitely is. But that just seems pretty unlikely, since it was probably below 30 degrees outside, and far enough out of everyone's way that I doubt anyone would be hanging out there, let alone hanging out there for hours and wearing what appeared to be an animal skin on their head. If it wasn't a person, based on the location and how the thing looked, well, I can only guess that it was probably a skinwalker. This experience honestly still terrifies me to this day when I think about it. I believe that I may even have a recording of the sound that I'll try to find. If I can find it, I'll be sure to share it, but due to the power outage and wanting to save battery and all that, I didn't film or record most of the experience just to conserve my already dying phone. I live with my partner and roommate, both of which are really into paranormal YouTube channels and shows. This is something that they bond over, and my roommate even has some tools that he has used, even in our own house that is over a century old. I, on the other hand, have an appreciation for it, but I'm not as into it as they are. I'm also more skeptical than they are, I suppose. Not to say that I don't believe in it, because I absolutely do, but I try to look at things from an objective point of view. With that being said, a few months ago, I am pretty sure I encountered a ghost cat. My partner and I have 3 cats. I work from home and have been dubbed the crazy cat lady, so the cats and I are all very attuned to one another. It began with me thinking that I see one of our cats out of the corner of my eye, but when I look, there's nothing there. I then began to see the cat figure walk around out of the corner of my eye. This is when I was introduced to the second ghost cat. One of them looks to be black or dark, while the other looks white. I've never seen both cats at the same time. We have a white cat with grey markings, a brown tabby, and a black and white tuxedo. Sometimes the ghost cats would do things my cats would normally do, so I chalked it up to being a muscle memory thing. Kind of like I'm used to them being there, so I feel like they're there. Until a few weeks ago when I was laying in bed, when I thought that I saw our white with grey spots cat dart across our room, something that she would absolutely do, but when I sat up to talk to her, I didn't see her anywhere. I laid back down to see a white cat dart across the room the other way, up into the bedroom window, and I heard scratching or tapping at the window, something that my cat would not do. I slowly sat up thinking that it had to be my cat, only to see nothing. I tried telling myself that it's the muscle memory thing, but I couldn't get myself to believe it that time. I feel like it was a white ghost cat. Because of the amount of minor encounters, I decided to bring it up to my partner and roommate. My partner says that he thinks he's seen them too, but he's been too afraid to believe it because he feels like it's not a cat, but a bad entity trying to disguise itself as something innocent. My roommate thinks that I'm just used to the cats and I'm just overthinking it. This was super disheartening because I don't feel like I'm being overdramatic at all. I really believe that I've felt them and seen them. Now, I'm sharing this because I had a second encounter of one of them just a little bit ago. I think a black cat ghost touching me. I will sit at my desk to work, and oftentimes my cats will come and rub up on my legs, then I'll reach down to pet them. A few weeks ago when this happened, I reached down to feel, but there was no cat. I thought that it was the chair or my pant leg just tricking me, but it just happened again. And this time it felt sort of odd. Now I am fully convinced that there is a black ghost cat and a white ghost cat that live in my house. My cats have never acted strangely towards them, which is another reason that I don't believe that they're bad entities disguised. I also think that it could be one ghost cat, but I absolutely have seen both a black and white one, but never together, which, I don't know, maybe it is just one thing. Anyway, do you have any thoughts on this? Do you think that it is some sort of entity? Are ghost cats even a thing? Am I being dramatic? Is any of this valid? What do you think? I work night shifts, so staying up through the night is pretty normal on my days off. About 2ish in the morning, I always let my dogs out, and I let one run and keep the other on a leash because she loves to run after literally nothing. But my leash dog starts to snarl at the tree line that is about 30 yards out from me, and I notice something very large moving awkwardly into the tree line, moving into the woods. It was walking with a heavy rock side to side, moving very slowly. I own horses which are fenced in, and this was happening outside of their fenced-in area, so I know that it wasn't any of them. This thing, though, was looking as big to bigger than my horses, so I was really confused. We do have deer that like to nest or settle overnight inside the fence with their younglings, because the horses ward off some predators like coyotes and such. I walked to my house to grab the flashlight, and of course, I shined the light, but there was nothing. I never heard a single crack or snap or nothing while I saw it, and afterwards it was gone, which was weird because it was so huge and I would have expected to hear something. Anyway, my son said this afternoon that he saw something at 12:30 last night and said one of the horses was out, but then after checking all the horses were in, said that he must have seen the biggest deer that he's ever seen. Like a deer as big as a horse or even bigger. Now, he lives in a different house but further away on the property, about 3 times the distance I am. I scare deer away every night before I let the dogs out, so I don't have to chase them in the middle of the night through the woods. But this, whatever it was no deer. My wife believes it to be the spirit of one of our horses or whatever that we had to put down last week. In the past, we both have had our share of weird instances at that woodline, but this, for me, it definitely took the cake. Scary thing is that we're planning to build our future home right by that area. I have had people stalk and follow me before, and because of that, and my true crime addiction, I've become supremely paranoid and a solid curtain twitcher. I, a 31-year-old female, reside in an upstairs room that was my first room to myself as a child. I had to leave a bad situation and therefore ended up back at my childhood home. For reference, when our house was built, we were told that the field to our left, with horses and a barn at the time, would one day soon be a development. It was 2000 when we were told that, and it wasn't until 2022 that roads started being formed and foundations laid. I'd already had someone follow me home before when I was young, but I was in a different bedroom next door. My parents put in a free library that's right below my window, and nighttime security lights that were very bright and turn on if you're within like 20 feet of the side of my house my room is on. I'll admit too that having an open field next to me so long made me accustomed to not closing the curtains when I changed, because there was never anyone to really watch or anything. But obviously now there is. For the past 2 weeks, the burglar lights next to the free library have been going off late at night as well. Because my one side of the curtain is open so I can use my vape, that was the only reason that I noticed at all. I didn't think too much of it at first. I mean, we lock all the doors and the windows every night, and I'm on the 2nd floor anyway. I also always looked out to see if it was a car, someone walking their dog, or maybe a deer, only to see nothing. To add to that as well, they put in a ton of streetlights around this area, so visibility is pretty great. But it just kept happening for whatever reason. So, last night I did my usual and I saw the lights come on out of my peripherals. Giving full view out the window, I was going to bed, it was around 3 in the morning, turning the TV off, closing the window and curtains, turning the light out. Then, I ducked down, peering through the curtains to the sidewalk below. And I honestly thought that I was going to pass out when, after a few minutes, maybe 5, someone comes out from the side of my house, all silhouette, dressed completely in black. They kept their back to me until the light turned off, but I swear that I could still see them standing there, looking up like they could see me. I called the police, but while I was on the phone with the operator, I saw him run off. There really wasn't much that they could do, except say that they'd have a car drive around and look. My parents are asleep, and I know that I have to tell them tomorrow, but this honestly scares me a lot. If it hadn't have been happening for weeks and was a solo incident, I would probably be fine about it. But the fact that the light has been going off without me seeing activity, and what happened tonight, makes me think that this person has been watching me, and probably casing my house. Eventually I did tell my parents, and at first they brushed me off, claiming that I'd had a couple of drinks and it was late, so I probably just saw someone checking out the library. I then had another conversation about it with just my dad, who said that there had been reports the last couple of weeks of car break-ins, and since my car is parked on my side of the street, right outside of my window, maybe they were trying to break into it. I pointed out that if he was trying to get into my car, why was he pressed up against the house where he wasn't visible from my window? And why did he at no point go towards my car as well? I think that I freaked him out enough that we're going to potentially get a camera for that area. Given all of the development happening around us, I think it's smart, even without this incident. Anyway, here's hoping that this guy doesn't have plans to break into our home at some point. But if he does, then what do you guys think that I should do? For context, I live in the woods of southern West Virginia, deep in the Appalachian wilderness. I'm an hour and a half away from any large city, and another 30 minutes from the nearest Walmart. Needless to say, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Yesterday I came home to a strange feeling that I was being watched. I thought that it might have been coyotes, so being the homesteader that I am, I sat outside with my gun and LGB, livestock guardian dog, and waited for them to come for my chickens. My dog was alerting me to the presence of something, but when he would get close to where it was, it just seemed to disappear. He would stick his nose in the air and catch wind of where it was and run to it, never finding anything. Fast forward to tonight, and I have the same feeling. I take my light outside and shine it at the edge of the woods, and that was when I noticed eyes staring at me. This is odd too, considering that my 150-pound LGB is going nuts, barking and looking for this thing, and it's sitting still, not moving. I walk right up to it, and I see a bobcat looking me dead in the eyes from 10 feet away. It looked away from me and walked around a tree, completely not paying attention to me. Now, for those who live in the city, Bobcats are extremely rare to see, let alone come within 10 feet of shining a light directly on it. I pulled my pistol out to shoot it, and it didn't go off. I racked it back and tried again, and still nothing. It felt like something was holding my trigger back almost. I ran inside to get my shotgun at this point, and I followed it into the woods about a quarter mile before I finally lost it. Keep in mind, it never once ran from me, but instead walked slowly, as if it was trying to lead me somewhere. When I came back out with the shotgun and followed it into the woods, as soon as I crossed the wood line, fog rolled in as if someone had a fog machine and was aiming it right at me. I mean, I couldn't see 5 feet in front of me. About the time that I turn around to come home, I see through the trees faintly my fiancée standing on the porch, looking back and forth from me and a spot far away behind my house in the woods. I came back down, and she was freaking out. She said that she heard me screaming, like screaming murder for her to help me. She said that I was screaming her name and help me from well over another quarter mile from where I actually was. She came outside to help me when she saw my light in the opposite direction of where she was still hearing the screaming coming from. During this whole thing, I never heard screaming once though, and I obviously never screamed myself. However, I had the constant feeling of being followed and watched that entire time, but I could never find out what was doing it. The night is young though, and quite honestly, I'm sort of expecting things to get a bit weirder tonight. If anything happens, then I'll be sure to post an update, but do wish me luck. I've been staging residential property homes in the San Francisco Bay Area for about 3 years now. I visit just about every neighborhood and every price range, from like $700 studios, insane I know, to $8 million homes. I usually never know the history of the property or the current sellers, but sometimes I do get insight from real estate agents that the family is growing and needs more room. The daughter is selling her pasted parents' home, a divorce, etc. I have, only on a few occasions, felt some not so welcoming energy in homes, I guess you could say. Maybe I walk a little quicker out of a room, or maybe I think that I saw someone walk past me through a doorway when there was nobody there, but nothing really threatening or anything. That is, until today. So I'm sitting in this really nice empty home, overlooking the ocean in San Francisco, just leaning against a wall in a room off the living room. The movers are outside loading the furniture into the garage to prep for our stage in 3 days. As I sit there in this quiet, empty home, up against a wall with a bathroom on my right and a closet to my left, just looking at my phone, I hear the most guttural, deep and high-pitched growl or scream come directly from behind me. Now, I'm up against a wall, so there is nothing but the bathroom and the closet behind me. I paused and sat there for a minute, and then got up to look out the windows thinking that it must be a dog outside or something, but there was nothing. I immediately felt very uneasy and suddenly frightened. I leave the house and wait with the movers, closed up, and I just left. I have never heard anything like this or felt so unwelcome in an empty home. I'm 17 now, but this happened from when I was roughly 5 to 8. Because this happened so long ago, I'm sure that there are a lot of things that I've forgotten over time or unintentionally blocked out. But around the time that I started kindergarten, we'd moved to a complex where I got a room of my own for the first time. I remember being scared to have a room all to myself, so I would always make sure my closet door was firmly closed, because I was pretty scared of monsters in my closet. I think this might have stemmed from my mum watching a lot of horror content around me, or maybe just a general childish fear, I guess. I do remember it being shortly after we had moved in, though, that I woke up when it was dark out, and I could tell by my window that was to the right of my bed. My closet door opened, and this boy hovered very low to the ground still, maybe an inch off, given that he seemed about my height or size, but didn't make a sound as he walked out of the closet and walked in a straight path from my closet to the window, but he stopped midway at the foot of my bed and just seemed to stare at me. His face was like melted glass, similar to the longer-faced ghost kid from Caroline. Sorry if you don't know that, but that's the only example that I can think of. But he wore a sailor suit, very similar to the results that you get for searching 1950s boys' sailor suit. I remember wanting to scream, but for some reason I couldn't. I hid under my blankets for a long time, and I don't remember what happened after that, but I assume that eventually I must have fallen asleep. Now, it might have been a few days, or maybe even a week, but I saw him again shortly after this. It was roughly the exact same encounter, so it doesn't stand out in my brain, but over the course of a few months, I had the courage to look back at him. I was very scared, but he would never do anything, and I think that I knew that. I mean, he never attempted to climb on my bed or anything or get closer to me. He only ever stopped and just sort of stared at me, and that never seemed to change. After I started looking at him, I learned that after he left the foot of my bed, he would go to the wall on my left and form a hole in my wall that he would then go through. I remember there were a few times that I would get up in the morning and try to see the portal or whatever it was, but of course it was never there. There was a long time of build-up too, but eventually I just wasn't scared anymore, and I remember the feeling of not being afraid when I looked back at him. After I wasn't scared anymore, I was able to get out of my bed right after he would leave and try to go through the portal, but it would close before I could get to the wall. I remember one specific night though where he just didn't show up, and I got confused because by that time it had become a routine to see him every night. I got up and looked out my window to see him feeding the deer on the property. Deer are pretty common in this area. He didn't look up at me or anything, but I remember just sort of staring at him. After we moved away from the complex, I never experienced anything close to this or ever had him appear in a dream or anything. Other small details I want to add as well is that he only seemed to exist in the complex. He never appeared in my school or daycare or anywhere else. My mum told me a few years ago that neighbors in the complex would tell her that I would play games by myself, but seemingly pretend that I was playing with another person. But I myself have no memory of that, so I don't know how reliable that actually is. From what I remember, no other kid in the complex experienced anything similar to this, including my two sisters who shared a room across from mine. I would tell people about the boy that I would see, but they all reacted a bit weird. It's also taken me a long time to come to the conclusion that this was probably paranormal, so I guess I just wanted to share it, and I want to know if anyone has had any similar memories that they carry with them. Like I said, my memories probably changed a bit over time, so take everything that I said with a bit of a grain of salt, but what I do remember very clearly is that there was this boy and he would come into my room every night. So, to give you a little bit of background information on this story, I would like to start with the fact that I'm European. I've shared another story a couple of months back about something that happened to me in Tuscany, Italy. As for me and my friends in this story, well, we're from Spain, and when this happened, end of September 2023, we were fairly new to the US. I moved here a while back for law school, and so did my friends. We'd been living here for a few months and decided to explore the nature of this beautiful continent, as we all live in New York City. So, Long story short, we decided to go on a road trip to Canada, drive around Lake Ontario, and then drive back to New York City through upstate New York. I'm a male and my friends were 3 females. Their names are Lisa, Anna, and Charlotte. And everything went super smooth until the last night. So, for our last night, we had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were like half an hour drive from Harrisburg, I think. Me and Lisa had decided to spend one night in this cabin because it was one with nature. The cabin was super old, made from logwood, and there was no running water or electricity. Both me and Lisa had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I, for myself, had been a Boy Scout my whole life and even was a scout leader for a while. Our other 2 friends were, as much as I love them, purebred city girls. But they had pretty much zero experience with camping or to just be in place where there's no service for the phone or whatever, as was the case in this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m. and was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost internet connection with the GPS, and so I had to drive to the cabin on intuition paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safe on these muddy trails. It was also rainy the whole day as well. On the way there, Anna and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment that they lost phone service, they got pretty uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, though, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, we all saw a campfire, but there were no houses around or people. Just a campfire. A well-organized one, since the fire was not spreading and it was not as big as a bonfire or anything. It kind of startled all of us, as this was a little bit weird since there was no one around and we were really deep in the forest already. Plus, it was getting pretty late at this point. When this happened, we also reached the end of the trail, and we figured that we'd taken the wrong trail at a crossroads before or something. So I turned around, and we were on our way again. Half an hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later as well, we finally had arrived at our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this godforsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you a bit of an idea of just how old it was as well, the potty was made out of wood and was outside of the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining, and both Anna and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car, and getting in the cabin with 0 lights was freaking them out too. So me and Lisa left the lights of the car on and went inside the cabin, while also using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see if we could find any old flashlights, which we did in the end, and to see if we could turn on the fireplace, which we didn't because all the wood was still wet from the rain, and it seemed as if nobody had prepared dry wood anywhere as well. So with a couple of old flashlights and a small improvised fire, I managed to make in the stove, and we all 4 got into the cabin, and I started to make some pasta for us. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows since it was already cold in this part of the state. The cabin had a small ladder which led to an elevated room or space with a bed where all 3 of the girls could fit in, and I would sleep downstairs in a bunk bed that seemed older than the First World War. While making pasta, Anna, one of the city girls, came up to me and, knowing that both Lisa and Charlotte did not like to hear anything scary at night, told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had seen a figure walking around there. I first laughed it off as nothing, as I mentioned in my previous story, I do not consider myself a big believer of scary stuff. Being from Spain, we take promises very seriously. To swear on God is very serious for us, and she swore that she was not lying. I told her that I believed her, but that there was really no need to panic, as I would lock all the doors when we would go to sleep at night. We had some pasta and managed to make a couple of s'mores, which are lovely by the way, and drank a couple of beers, or at least I did. They all just had one. I can assure you that I'm not a drunk after a couple of beers, and that I would never start to hallucinate or anything too. I'm just saying this in case anyone thinks that I saw stuff because of the beer or whatever. But they all three went to sleep pretty early after finishing the s'mores and their beer, and I, considering that I really love the outdoors, and that I don't really mind a little bit of rain, decided to take my last beer and a flashlight outside to the front porch, also very old and made of wood, and sat myself down with my beer while enjoying the sound of the rain and the lovely sight of not seeing a single light in the distance. I could greatly appreciate this coming from New York City, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was really not much to see, I guess, but there were a lot of trees and a small creek a little bit further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain, and the running water down in the creek. That was until I suddenly heard what I would describe as a weird sort of roar. The first thing that came to my mind was a bear, but I had researched pretty well before our trip, and I knew bears were not common at all in this part of the state. I also know what a bear roar would sound like, and it just didn't resemble that. Except for the fact that it was a deep roar, I guess, if you get what I mean, but startled, but not really scared, I guess, I continued to scan the rest of the forest for as far as I could see from the porch. And it was then when my eye caught the glimpse of a figure, well hidden deep into the tree line. I would describe the figure as tall. As a reference, I'm 6'4", and I thought this thing was at least a foot or two higher than me. It was well hidden because it had brown fur. That's what I think it was at least, or the skin in any case. It blended in well with the trees in autumn. It was definitely aware of our presence, as I saw two eyes glimpsing into my flashlight. I couldn't tell you what it was, but I swear that it was not a bear. Whatever it was bipedal and had rather long arms, I would say. We looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably more like 5 seconds before it just suddenly vanished behind a tree, and I heard another roar. It was then, too, that I felt all of the hair on my body stand up, and I was definitely very much scared. I went inside as quick as I could and locked all the doors and closed all the curtains. I quickly went to bed and tried to wave it off as just my exhaustion of driving all day playing tricks on me, but I promise you that whatever this was, it was real. After an hour or so, I had finally calmed down and I went to sleep. The rest of the night was pretty uneventful, really, and the next morning when I went to relieve myself, after having drank beer the night before, the weather had cleared up a bit and it was pretty sunny, and as far as I could see, the forest was calm and beautiful again. No sight of any animals or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning and left for our way back to the city that never sleeps. And so ends also my story of that night. I never talked about what I saw that night because I know all three girls did not like to hear scary stories. And I figured that after all these months that this was the best place to share it. If anyone has any idea of what it could have been, then feel free to enlighten me, especially if it's backed up with rational reasoning. Something tells me, though, based on those long arms, that whatever it was not common to the area. This happened about 8 years ago now, almost to the day, in fact. So, I was living in one city and working in another city about 20 minutes away. Since then, the areas between have been hugely developed, but at that time, everything between these cities was just undeveloped back roads with nothing around. No buildings, no sidewalks, no lights, just rough old roads until you get into the other city. To get to work on time, I had to leave my house at 3:30 in the morning. And one morning, I jolted awake at 3:20, full of adrenaline as I realized that I only had 10 minutes to get myself ready and set my dog to be alone while I was at work. Needless to say, the circumstances had me highly alert, rushing and focused. Also, I was driving a lot faster that day, but I drove down this road every day as I went to work. I usually take that time to wake up, but this time I was wide awake. All I could think about was what would happen if I ended up being late for work. I was really anxious when suddenly my headlights shone up on something in the distance ahead of me. Now, what I saw was a naked, skinless man crossing the road on foot. When I say skinless, imagine those diagrams in your life science classes, everything beneath the skin revealed and intact, except in this case with a sort of shiny, wet appearance, bright pinks and reds all over, like literally a living, skinless person. No clothes, no shoes, and notably appearing oddly content. He seemed strangely at ease considering that he was crossing the road into nothingness in front of a speeding car in the dark at 3:45 in the morning. There was no walking space suitable for humans out there for like miles as well. And the area that he was walking into was pitch black, nothing there but weeds and rocks. The direction that he was coming from, the same. No light, nowhere to roam, nothing. Now, like I said, I was sober and super awake at this point, so I have no doubt in my mind that I wasn't hallucinating or tripping or anything. But I have no idea what it was that I saw that day. It was 1998. I was 8 years old and visiting my dad's childhood home. The town where he grew up was so small that you could drive through it within 10 minutes. I still remember the smell of steak from the mum and pop owned restaurant, the sweet cookies from the bakery, and even the cigarette smoke from the hair salon that my grandma used to run out of her basement from 15 years earlier. The house, it had to have been built in the early 1900s. The floors creaked and there were vines all over the front of the house that my dad wanted to get rid of, but my grandma liked the way that they looked. It gave her privacy, she said. My brother slept in my dad's old room, which was primarily blue. I remember the Chicago sports team posters on the wall, edges torn and frayed from time and the occasional water damage. Out of the two remaining rooms, I chose my grandmother's linen room and my parents took the spare room downstairs. I remember the room being sort of frilly. White frilly curtains matched the white lace comforter on the bed, her sewing machine in the far right corner, in front of the window where she would watch my dad play in the backyard. My dad playfully whispered, "That's the haunted room, you know." My dad was and still is a bit of a jokester. I remember scrunching my nose at him and put my suitcase on the floor in front of the bed. Little did I know, though, that he wasn't kidding. My biggest worry was that I would wake up in a puddle from my 4-year-old sister who shared the bed with me that night. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, though, and sort of looking around. Everything was dark except for the dim light that came from the bathroom down the hallway. The shadows from the sewing machines hit the wall and looked like boxcars. I turned over to face the left side of the room, and that was when I saw her. At first I thought it was my mum, a silhouette of a woman who was standing in the doorway of the room. She was wearing a white dress. My mum didn't wear dresses, not even a nightgown. She had long fine hair and my mum had the typical fluffy 90s do-cut at her shoulders. I quickly realized that this wasn't my mum and panic suddenly set in. She was all white, skin, hair, dress, everything. I remember that she also had a sort of subtle glow about her. She was leaning on the doorframe, watching us sleep. Her head was tilted to the side, resting on her right hand that was being supported by her elbow against the frame. I guess I could say that I wasn't scared, but she was terrifying, but sort of comforting at the same time. It was sort of like she was watching her own children sleeping, lovingly. I remember closing my eyes and praying that she wouldn't come near me, and she never did. The next morning, I went to the kitchen where my grandma was already awake, making us breakfast. waffles with several different syrups and a huge bowl of assorted fruit. I didn't talk or eat much for the majority of breakfast, and my dad definitely took notice. After a few minutes of coaxing, I finally told him what I saw, and he immediately looked at my grandma and said, "See, I told you." This is a recollection of a campout that I had a few summers ago, and the exact details have started to become fuzzy, but I'll try to relay it as best as I can. So, it's a Boy Scout camp, northern Wisconsin. I'm sure you can probably guess which one. It's got a smiling tent as a mascot. There's maybe a little over a dozen of us, some scout leaders too, all within a little clearing that makes up where one of the many troops are set up. 2 boys to each tent at this point. Me and my best friend from very, very early childhood are tent buddies, and on maybe the 3rd night at this camp is when this happens. So, I remember falling asleep pretty normally. It's dark, and I wasn't the last one to leave the campfire after dinner. Me and my friend both were in our sleeping bags on opposite sides of the tent. Our bags are at our side and our hiking boots right by the door, carefully removed when we entered the tent. Eventually, I wake up to strange sounds, hard breathing or maybe soft grunting or whatever. It's the dead of night, like 2 or 3 in the morning. Must have been around that time. I'm sort of frozen and I look around at the walls of the tent, but nothing seems amiss. Just this heavy, low breathing sound. It was then that I see my buddy is awake as well, and we're both frozen and terrified. He starts to say something, but I put my finger to my lips and make the shushing gesture. Behind his head, where he was laying, something is brushing up against the tent, poking into the artificial fabric, almost sort of antler-like. I also could have sworn that I heard someone say, "Hello, is anyone there?" My friend then sees this and lets out a small gasp. Something pokes through the tent suddenly, sharp and black. A loud exhale, and then whatever it was just steps back. We hear branches crunch and twigs snap, fading into the distance. We stay awake for another hour, and in hushed whisper try to rationalize what the heck just happened, asking if we should check outside the tent. We both don't remember falling asleep again, but we wake up in the morning. The hole in the tent is there, along with 3 to 4 more similar ones on various sides of it. By the time the other boys in the camp were waking up, I had the courage to check around the tent to see if there's any footprints, broken twigs, or something to determine just what was outside of our tent. And behind our tent were bare human footprints. They circled around our tent several times, but never did they lead to or from the tent. Just 3 to 4 rings of footprints that looped around it. We asked around to see if anybody had actually pulled a prank on us, but everyone that was there swore that they hadn't. Whatever happened, me and my buddy talked about it a few times on that trip, but these days, we refuse to talk about it again. I've always wanted my own dog. I put a lot of research into it and decided to get a Burmese mountain dog, which my mum graciously paid for part of as a graduation present. One thing to know about this breed, and my dog in specific, is that they are very friendly and don't know a stranger. Before getting him, I saw videos of the same breed just napping while repair people came into the backyard. This was not an issue for me. I mean, we have a very protective St. Bernard at home, and I didn't think that we needed a second guard dog. And as I wanted to be able to take my dog out, it was better for him to be friendly anyway. So around October, when a chill was just starting to form in the air, a friend and I, we decided to get some pumpkin-flavored coffee for us and a pup cup for Sirius and go to a local park to get him some exercise, now that it wasn't too hot for him outside, and to smoke some as well. This is not one of the nicer parks. It used to have a dog park attached to it, but due to flood damage, continuous as well, it was closed down, and now the area where it used to be is mostly secluded. And there's plenty of people who use that to their advantage, and do drugs there as well. There's also lots of families on the weekends that go there as well, but this was the middle of the week during school and work hours, so the park was pretty empty when we got there. As we walked past a man who was training for something that I'm not sure that I'd like to know about, to be honest. He was carrying a full army pack and was drenched in sweat, and when I later told my stepdad about this, he said that he had seen the same guy running along the main road where there are no sidewalks. Sirius completely ignored him. We also met a couple who had a Rottweiler puppy a few months younger than my dog, and we stopped to let them play for a moment and talk to the couple. Sirius had absolutely no issues with the pair and was very happy to receive pets from them as well. Eventually, we got to the location we were planning to smoke at, directly underneath the train tracks, which is the most secluded location in the park. There's only one path to get to it, unlike the rest of the park that sort of loops around. This area used to be a road, but it was purchased by the city for the park, so it's empty besides a house or two just past the barriers. We were there for maybe around 30 minutes before an older man walks by, gives us a "how's it going?" the way people do when you pass them on a walk, and turns around and walks back the other way. A little while later, he passes back again and notices us still sitting there, stops and says, "Are you girls alright? Are you waiting on a ride?" This did creep me out a bit, but I tend to be overly cautious, so I say, "Oh no, we're okay," which was completely true. I mean, I had driven there and I was still nowhere sober enough to drive, and we were just enjoying the nice weather before it got too cold. He responds by telling us to have a nice day and turns around. Sirius, through these interactions, just continued to play with his stick that he was chewing on. I mention these encounters just to solidify how absolutely strange the next one was. So, soon after, a man who seemed to be in his late 40s or early 50s starts to walk toward us. Instead of turning around like the other man had done, he starts to walk toward us, and Sirius absolutely loses it, barking and growling at this man and attempting to lunge at him. Despite the fact that he was only around 7 months old at this time, Sirius was a big dog, probably around 70 pounds at this point, and the man was very freaked out and continues past us, walking faster and keeping his distance. However, like I said earlier, there's nothing behind us besides an empty road and thick heavy woods. My friend and I continued to sit there talking until I was sure enough that he was gone. That was weird, right? I asked my friend around 30 minutes later. She agreed with me. I mean, where did he even go anyway? That was something I hadn't considered at that time, but looking around I couldn't think of anywhere that he could have been. Because we're high and stupid though, we come up with the brilliant idea to wait and see if he passes us again. And if he doesn't, we'd walk towards the road behind us to see if there were houses that he could have gone to. However, him living in one seemed pretty unlikely. I mean, he was dressed for hiking clearly with one of those backpacks specifically made for it. And if he lived so close, I didn't think that he'd be dressed up for a hike or anything. He doesn't pass us again, so we walk up the small hill and past the barricade. There's around 3 houses just past it, all pretty run down, and the second that we got to the first one, a man comes out on this porch with a gun and just stares at us. So, safe to say that the people who live there aren't a fan of people from the park on their property. I don't know if that's connected, but I think the only solution is that he went into the woods. I've never seen my dog act like that before, and I haven't seen him act like that since then. Every other time he acts like everyone he meets is known for life. I've always thought that dogs have better instincts than us, and I think that this just proved it for me. We're both pretty small girls, around 100 pounds and under 5'5", and it's scary to think what could have happened had my dog not been with us. And, I mean, we had no way to defend ourselves in such a secluded area. Like I said, this place was like forest beyond us, so really there was no reason for this guy to go there. My hunch is that he actually passed us, realized that our dog wasn't going to let him get near us, and ended up just continuing walking so that he didn't look too suspicious. It's either that or he was involved in something in that house. Which begs the question, what the heck is going on in that dilapidated house?